Welcome back, brothers, to Warhammer. Tonight's story, we're covering the fall of Cadia through the eyes of the Despoiler. Before you get the madness, be sure to like and comment any videos and topics you want to see in the future. Be sure to subscribe for the Emperor. I want to thank you guys for support. I've been absolutely killing it. Now, let's get into the video.
The Eye of Terror did not have weather, not as mortal minds understood it. It had moods, it had hungers, it had tempests made from murdered prayers, and tides of thought that rolled through unreality with the pressure of collapsing stars. It sang in the bones of ships and whispered through the teeth of sleeping men. It made saints weep blood in their distant shrines and turned astropaths blind before they were ever born. The vengeful spirit endured it all. The ancient battleship hung in the Empyrean like a cathedral built around a wound. Its flanks were blackened by 10,000 years of war. Its gun decks were cities of iron and bone. Its launch bays were cavernous enough to swallow regiments. Its engines burned with furnace light that had carried it from the dawn of the heresy to the edge of mankind's ending. Where other vessels suffered the warp, the vengeful spirit wore it like a cloak. In the strategium, beneath vaults ribbed with adamantium and tarnished brass, Ezekiel Abaddon watched the galaxy bleed. The hololithic map before him was alive. It pulsed in the gloom, a vast suspended wound of red light and black void. Cadia burned at its center, marked not as a planet, but as a knot, a clenched fist of Imperial resistance drawn tight across the throat of the Eye. Around it glimmered the fortress systems and bastion worlds of the Cadian Gate. Balis Corona, Agrippina, Casa Partox, Casa Sonnen, Sola Mariatus. Names spat by Imperial priests with reverence. Names carved into fleet-tithe ledgers and regimental banners. Names that had stood for obedience, defiance, and the lie that the Imperium could hold back damnation with walls and guns. Abaddon looked upon them and saw hinges. He did not hate Cadia as lesser warlords hated it. Hate was too small a thing for what he felt. Hate was the twitching fury of berserkers. Hate was what drove a starving cultist to claw at a bunker door until his fingers broke. Hate was useful in its place, but it was not strategy. Cadia was not merely a fortress world. It was not merely the anvil upon which 12 Black Crusades had been judged by fools who counted only conquest and missed the shape of war. Cadia was a lock, a prison bar driven into reality. A Blackstone-studded insult planted before the Eye, daring the legions to break themselves against it, century after century. It was the Imperium's clenched hand around the throat of destiny. For 10,000 years, it had stood. For 10,000 years, the sons of Horus had been called failures by corpses in gilded halls and historians too weak to lift a blade. The Imperium had named the Long War a series of defeats because the Imperium understood only territory, only banners raised over ash, only maps redrawn by administratum clerks with ink-stained fingers. They saw worlds lost and reclaimed. They saw crusades surge and withdraw. They saw Abaddon return to the Eye and told themselves he had been beaten. They were children counting scars on a predator and mistaking every healed wound for survival. Abaddon remembered each crusade. He remembered the relics taken from vaults no loyalist would ever admit had been breached. He remembered the gene seed burned, the chapter keeps emptied, the forge worlds infected with scrap code that would sleep for centuries before awakening. He remembered demon weapons bargained for, Xenos engines uncovered, Blackstone secrets dragged from dead civilizations and screaming savants. He remembered Imperial roots weakened, naval reserves bled, saintly blood spilled on nameless moons, and entire sectors taught to fear the return of the Eye's shadow. Preparatory wounds, all of them. The galaxy had been cut long before it understood it was dying. He stood immobile before the hololith, a giant in black warplate. His Terminator armor was not a suit of protection. It was a walking shrine to treachery, conquest, and survival. Its plates were layered with old scars and oath marks, trophy chains and eye sigils, blackened gold and worn ceramite. The armor's machine spirit growled with every minute adjustment, a caged beast dreaming of impact. The talon of Horus encased his right hand, its claws flexing with soft hydraulic hunger. There were ghosts in that weapon, if one believed in such things. Kings had died beneath it. Angels had bled before it. The dreams of an empire had once broken beneath those talons. At his other side hung Draconian. The demon blade whispered from its prison, not in words alone, but in sensation. Knife through bone, breath over a dying throat, the first murder, the oldest betrayal. It spoke of open doors and broken fathers, of the taste of the Emperor's fear, of the thinness of reality around Cadia's pylons. It promised him a throne of skulls, then a throne beyond skulls, then the death of all thrones. Abaddon ignored it. That, more than anything, was why the chamber feared him. Around the strategium stood the lords of the damned. They gathered beneath banners that had once marched in the Great Crusade and now hung like flayed skins from iron spars. Black Legion captains stood in disciplined silence, their armor marked with the eye, their helms tucked beneath their arms or locked into their gorgets. Their stillness was not peace. It was violence awaiting command. Zaraphistan stood near the leftmost hololithic dais, robes hanging in funereal layers over armor etched with warding sigils and blasphemous scripture. The seer's eyes were milk white, though Abaddon knew he saw more than any mortal organ could bear. Warp light crawled under his skin in brief, worming pulses. He breathed through clenched teeth, tasting futures. Cadia's siren lingered in the shadows behind the map. He had the patient posture of an executioner pretending to be a scholar. His gauntlets were stained despite the attentions of serfs, and the Dravura Morkath stood apart from both of them, half lit by the crimson glow of Cadia's projection. Her flesh had been altered by Blackstone communion and the long corruption of the will of eternity. Cabling vanished beneath her armor. Her eyes reflected no light in a way that was not natural. When she moved, faint harmonics passed through the deck, as if something immense and distant had shifted in answer. She was a key, though no key forged by sane hands. She had bound herself to a weapon older than mankind's empire, and Abaddon would spend her when the hour demanded it. Beyond them gathered the envoys. The Iron Warriors spoke first, because they always believed iron gave them the right. Their warsmith's helm was a brutal wedge of hazard-striped plate, his voice a gravel rasp through corrupted vox grills. The walls of Cadia are ours by right of craft. Give us the siege lines, give us the guns. We will reduce their casas to foundations and their foundations to dust. A World Eater's lord laughed through a mouthful of iron teeth. His armor was red not from paint alone. Chain axes hung from his fists, their teeth purring in idle hunger. Siege lines are cowardice with mathematics. Give us the landing fields. Give us the trenches. Give us a road to their throats. Roads are made by guns, the Iron Warrior said. Roads are made by bodies. From the Death Guard came a wet chuckle. The Plague Champion's armor wept black fluids that hissed where they struck the deck. Flies crawled in and out of rents in his neck seal. Bodies rot, walls rot, worlds rot. Let us have the water tables and the wind corridors. Cadia will breathe us in before it sees us. A Night Lord's captain tilted his skull-faced helm toward the map, lenses glimmering with corpse light. You think too much of walls and trenches. Give us their vox. Give us their pict feeds. Give us their children's prayers and their officers' last words. A fortress is already breached when its defenders hear themselves dying. The word-bearer envoy raised a crozius made from fused vertebrae and black iron. The pylons must be profaned with rite and revelation. Their false stillness must hear the truth of the pantheon. Give us the ritual ground, and we will make the planet's bones kneel. An emperor's children lord smiled with polished cruelty, his armor too bright, too ornate, too alive with sensation-fed twitching. And when the gates open, Warmaster, we claim the choirs, the nobles, the officers, the brave ones, especially the brave ones. Fear ferments beautifully in courage. Voices rose, not shouting, not yet, but the chamber thickened with murder. Old hatreds tightened between legions. Weapons purred awake by instinct. A chain axe revved once, low and eager. Targeting runes flickered behind red eye lenses. The warriors of the Long War had crossed 10,000 years and still could not stand in the same chamber without wanting to kill one another. Abaddon let them continue. He listened as a lesser warlord of the Crimson Slaughter, swollen with borrowed demonic confidence, stepped from the second rank and spoke out of turn. "Warmaster," the renegade said, though he made the title sound like a negotiation. "My host did not answer your summons to be spent as chaff, while ancient legions squabble over glory. Give us place in the first descent, or we will seek our own omens in the slaughter." The strategium became still. Cadia's siren looked down at his Abaddon turned from Cadia. The renegade warlord had time to understand that every warrior in the chamber had measured the distance to the exits, not because they planned to run from one another, but because all of them feared being too close to him. The Warmaster crossed the strategium with the slow inevitability of orbital collapse. The renegade reached for his blade. It cleared the scabbard by a handspan. The talon of Horus closed around his helm. Ceramite screamed. Bone folded. The warlord's faceplate collapsed inward with a wet metallic crunch, lenses bursting in sprays of red glass and darker matter. His limbs thrashed once, power armor spasming as his skull became pulp inside the crushed helm. Abaddon did not tear the head free. He held the body upright while it died, forcing every envoy to watch the last tremors run through the armor. Then he dropped it. The corpse struck the deck like discarded ammunition. "Chaff," Abaddon said, his voice calm. "Does not request placement." No one spoke. He returned to the hololith and lifted the talon. Cadia's red image revolved before him, surrounded by the fortress systems that had bled his fleets, mocked his oaths, and held the eye at bay. Void supremacy comes first. Their pickets will die. Their orbital platforms will burn. Their astropathic choirs will scream themselves empty, sending warnings no one will answer in time. The map shifted. Defense rings became arterial lines. Fleet routes opened like wounds. Then terror pressure. Their vox will carry despair. Their sleep cycles will rot. Their commanders will hear their own dead-giving orders. Their children will learn the sound of our guns before they learn the comfort of silence. The Night Lord's captain bowed his head by the smallest degree. Orbital decapitation follows. Command bastions, shield nodes, munition arteries, Casa relay spines. We do not fire for spectacle. We fire to make their courage inefficient. The Iron Warrior Warsmith gave a low grunt of approval. Pylon disruption will proceed under layered assault. The Blackstone is the throat of this world. The throat is where the blade goes. Morkath's eyes flickered at that. Somewhere beyond the hull of the vengeful spirit, something vast answered in a subsonic tremor. Mass landings begin once their guns reveal themselves. Spend the mutants. Spend the cults. Spend the renegades. Spend every oathless thing that crawled from the eye begging for war. Their deaths will draw fire and mark the teeth of Cadia's defenses. The World Eater Lord breathed harder. The Death Guard champion's flies thickened in the air. Demonic escalation comes only when the pylons weaken. Until then, I will not feed the Empyrean into a furnace built to deny it. Any who waste my strength on vanity will join that carrion on the deck. His gaze moved across them all. And when Cadia is exhausted, when its defenders are bloodless but not broken, when Creed has committed every reserve and every gun has spoken its name, I will descend. The silence deepened. Even the demon blade seemed to listen. Abaddon looked again upon the hololithic planet. "Cadia is not a world," he said. "It is a door. I have come to break the hinges." No cheer followed. No prayer, no berserk howl. The warriors in the chamber understood, each in his own flawed way, that they had not been summoned to another raid, another vengeance war, another glorious failure to be sung by madmen in the eye. They had been summoned to the end of a prison. Far beyond the Strategium's armored walls, the fleet moved. Orders passed through vox and astropathic shriek, through scrap code and bound demon whisper, through signal fires burning in languages that made mortal eyes bleed. Engines ignited across the void. Warships turned their prows toward real space. Launch bays opened like iron mouths. Millions of slaves dragged munitions into loading shrines. Legionaries sealed helms and checked bolters. Cult priests cut their tongues out in offering. Navigators screamed as they saw the path ahead. Behind the armada, the warp split. Something vast emerged from the storm. The will of eternity came forth in silence, and its silence was worse than thunder. The corrupted Blackstone fortress drifted behind the fleet like a murdered moon dragged on chains, its angular immensity bleeding impossible light, its ancient architecture scarred by demonic growth and the black iron grafts of the dark mechanicum. Reality bent around it. The eye recoiled and embraced it in the same breath. Abaddon watched it appear upon the hololith, its rune burning darker than the void around it. At last, the key had come to the lock. The 13th Black Crusade entered real space like a wound tearing open across the void. There was no clean translation, no disciplined emergence from the immaterium, such as Imperial tacticians described in their dry manuals and sanctified naval catechisms. The eye of terror spat the fleet out in convulsions. Warp lightning crawled over the skin of reality. Stars shuddered behind veils of blood-colored distortion. Auspec's ghosts multiplied until loyalist machine spirits shrieked false returns by the thousand, and then fell silent, their cogitators burning out in prayer sparks and molten copper. First came the plague hulks, vast and swollen, their hulls cratered with disease and rust, their engines coughing green fire through trails of corpse gas. They rolled from unreality with the obscene patience of dead gods. Their prows were carved into weeping icons and bloated faces. Their armor plating had split in places, not from battle damage, but from the pressure of things growing beneath the metal. Spores, flies, and frozen human waste vented from them in clouds that glittered briefly in the void before subliming into poison frost. Then came the grand cruisers and murder-class vessels, iron predators with lance decks already charged, macro batteries tracking before their hulls had fully settled into real space. Demon-infested escorts followed in hunting packs, their silhouettes wrong, their flight paths too eager, too alive. Some had eyes opening along their flanks. Some trailed chains miles long, each link bearing the frozen remains of prisoners who had been nailed there before translation and had died screaming in 2 dimensions at once. Behind them came the transports. There were too many to count. Slave-packed bulk haulers, cult vessels with shrine towers bolted to their spines, mutant barges welded from the corpses of older ships, penal hulks taken in forgotten wars, their holds filled with oathless wretches, beastmen, renegade militia, corpse grinders, heretic engine clans, and chanting mobs who had been promised Cadia's soil and would be lucky to die before touching it. Some vessels had no names, only wounds where names had been scraped away. Others broadcast their titles over open vox in Binharic blasphemy, in dead Gothic, in howls, in laughter, in the wet choking language of possessed throats. Last came the Black Legion, capital ships translated in disciplined formation, black and gold hulls cutting through the madness around them with the authority of kings entering a court of animals. Their void shields flared like eclipsed suns, their gun ports opened in measured sequence, their icons burned with the eye. Unlike the lesser vessels, they did not tumble from the warp. They arrived. At the center of them all, the vengeful spirit emerged from the storm. Across the Cadian gate, Imperial augurs began to die. Orbital watch stations caught the first returns and tried to classify them. Their logic engines failed under the weight of impossible numbers. Defense monitors rotated in their berths, sirens howling through armored corridors. Astropaths in sealed choirs began screaming before their overseers could force the message through. Some burst blood from their eyes. Some bit through their own tongues. Some spoke in voices that were not theirs, repeating the same phrase in High Gothic until their lungs ruptured. They are here. Admiral Quarren's outer screens reacted with the speed of men who had trained all their lives for a nightmare they had prayed would never come. Picket squadrons burned retros and moved to intercept. Minefields woke from cold sleep, logic spirits receiving final authorization through command cant and machine prayer. Orbital bastions rotated their lance arrays toward the breach. Defense lasers rose from shielded housings on dead moons and fortress stations. Cadian naval crews sealed pressure doors, locked helm restraints, and recited the rites of last engagement over Vox channels already thick with static. Within minutes, every command soul in the outer defense grid understood the truth. This was not a raid. This was not another probing thrust from the eye, not another warband testing the gate. Not another glory-hungry traitor admiral throwing his ships against Imperial guns in the hope of pleasing gods that lied as easily as they breathed. This was extinction. Abaddon stood aboard the vengeful spirit and watched the first exchanges bloom across the hololithic void. He did not cheer. The strategium around him trembled as the ship's main batteries began their firing rites. Serfs moved in silence, faces pale beneath tattooed oaths and surgical plugs. Legionary officers stood at their stations, helms locked, voices muted into disciplined vox clicks. The great hololith shimmered before the warmaster, showing the defense grid in arterial red and hostile icons in black fire. Every impact became data. Every death became position. Every burning ship revealed something. He watched the first wave die and measured Cadia by the shape of its response. Imperial macro-cannon broadsides tore through the forward slave flotillas. Whole transports came apart in slow, expanding storms of iron and meat. One mutant hauler, its holds filled with tens of thousands of screaming bodies, took a nova shell amidships and became a brief, ugly star. Its wreckage spread across the void, bodies flash-freezing as they tumbled through burning debris. Another vessel struck a mine chain and broke open from prow to stern, spilling its living cargo into vacuum. The cultists died with their mouths open, hands clawing at nothing, eyes boiling in their skulls. Abaddon marked the minefield density. Lance batteries answered from the Chaos Fleet. Red spears crossed the void, striking orbital stations and cracking shield layers. Some shots flared harmlessly against Cadian void shields. Others found seams. A bastion moon lost an entire gun ridge, its surface vomiting molten rock and atmosphere. Still it kept firing. Imperial crews did not abandon their stations. They fed shells into macro breaches, while the walls burned around them. They worked as their compartments decompressed. They worked with skin blistering and blood boiling in their veins. Servitors, mindless and half-dead, continued loading guns after their organic limbs froze black. Abaddon saw the rhythm. Outer Bastion Group 7 reloads slower after shield flare, he said. A Black Legion officer repeated the observation through command vox. Seconds later, 3 murder-class cruisers shifted fire. The Bastion's shields flashed again, weakened, and failed beneath the next volley. Its armor held for another breath. Then a lance beam cut through its gun decks, and the station opened like a skull under a hammer. The Warmaster felt no pleasure. Pleasure was for the weak-minded. Information was better. Send the 3rd and 5th transport claws through the western mine arc, he ordered. Cadia's siren looked up from his data streams. Projected loss is near total. Near total is sufficient. The order passed. Cult transports surged forward, engines flaring hot and ragged. Their crews had not been told they were chaff. Some believed themselves chosen. Some sang as they advanced. Some fired crude weapons at targets far beyond range. They entered the mine arc and died by the hundreds. Mines blossomed in disciplined sequence, tearing through hulls, cracking keels, shredding void shields too weak to matter. Wreckage piled in space. Broken prows spun onward. Burning engines became drifting cover. The minefield spent itself on the unworthy. Through the gap came the Black Legion's guns. Macro cannon fire rolled from Abaddon's capital ships in thunderous broadsides. The recoil shuddered through decks older than many Imperial dynasties. Shells the size of hab blocks crossed the void and struck Quarren's screens. Escorts vanished. A cruiser lost its bridge and continued forward on momentum, its dead hands still locked to dead controls. A defense monitor turned too slowly and was caught by converging lance strikes, its reactor going critical in a white flash that briefly painted the eye's reflection across every hull nearby. "Captain Vorgast has opened the lane," Siren reported. "3 of his ships are destroyed. His command vessel is crippled. Commend him." The words went out across the command net. A rare thing, a dangerous thing. Praise from Abaddon carried weight because it was never given to comfort the living. It was a blade placed against the throat of every officer who had done less. Another icon flickered at the edge of the hololith. A Black Legion cruiser had fallen back from the forward push, its captain preserving hull integrity after moderate shield degradation. Abaddon watched the movement for one heartbeat. "Open command vox to Captain Malreth." The channel cracked alive. A voice came through, distorted by static and suppressed fear. "Warmaster, my vessel remains combat capable. I am repositioning to maintain the line. You are withdrawing from the line. My lord, my shields are compromised. I judge preservation of firepower to be of greater value than expenditure." Abaddon's gaze did not move from the hololith. "You judged." There was silence. Then Malreth spoke again, smaller now. "I serve the long war." "No," Abaddon said. "You serve because I permit you to serve." He lifted the Talon of Horus slightly. A rune flared on the command display. A kill command, old and intimate, passed through the Black Legion hierarchy. On the distant cruiser, Malreth's first officer obeyed without hesitation. There was a burst of sound over the vox. A bolt pistol fired inside a command throne. Wet impact. Armor collapsing. A body hitting the deck. Abaddon left the channel open long enough for the entire fleet to hear the corpse settle. "Advance that vessel," he said. The first officer's voice answered at once. "By your will, Warmaster." The cruiser turned back into the fire. Only then did Abaddon look toward the teleportarium runes. "Begin boarding actions." Across the crippled Imperial stations, the air turned black with teleport flare. Black Legion terminators appeared in corridors of blown atmosphere and emergency lumen glow, their arrival cracking deck plates and turning frost to steam beneath their boots. They moved without haste, combi bolters rising, chain fists growling, trophy chains clinking softly against ancient plate. Naval armsmen fired at them from barricades of ammunition crates and dead crew. Shot cannon blasts sparked against Terminator armor. Lass fire washed over black ceramite. Grenades detonated beneath their feet. The Terminators advanced. Bolters spoke in controlled bursts. Each shell struck like a judgment. Armsmen came apart in sprays of armor, bone, and pressure-frozen blood. A petty officer tried to raise a power sword and lost his chest to a mass-reactive detonation. A Skitari detachment counterattacked from a maintenance shrine, galvanic rifles firing blue-white lines through the murk. One Terminator staggered as rounds chewed into his pauldron. Another answered with a heavy flamer, filling the corridor with burning promethium. The Skitari did not scream as men screamed. Their vox grills emitted bursts of binary agony, while their robes caught fire and their augmetic limbs fused to the deck. In a gun chamber open to the void, servitors continued their loading cycle. Half their flesh had frozen. One had lost its lower body entirely, spine cables trailing behind it as it dragged a shell with mechanical devotion. A black legionary paused long enough to watch the thing try to serve a dead empire. Then he crushed its skull underfoot and moved on. The station died room by room, not because Abaddon needed it intact, because every boarding action forced the Cadian defense grid to respond, to redirect, to reveal which stations mattered and which commanders had nerve. Below, Cadia awakened into war. Cassas sealed their blast doors. Great slabs of adamantium and ferrocrete sank into place with the sound of mountains grinding shut. Regiments mustered beneath cold lumen strips, boots hammering parade decks already dusted with falling plaster from the first orbital tremors. Cadian shock troops checked laser guns, power packs, bayonets, rebreathers, grenades, and the familiar weight of duty. Kasrkin moved without wasted speech, their hellguns charged, their targeters blinking green across black visors. White shields were shoved into assigned routes, not with tenderness, but with the hard efficiency of a world that raised its young to understand evacuation drills and firing. Lines before most planets taught prayer. Artillery woke, basilisk batteries elevated their barrels, manticore racks armed, Hydra platforms tracked the burning sky, Earthshaker crews performed loading rites while priests stalked between them, screaming litanies until their throats tore. Munitorum adepts opened vaults, engine seers anointed breaches with sacred oil. Vox officers received orders from commanders who had been born beneath the shadow of this war and had never believed they would die anywhere else. In fortress command posts, Cadian officers looked at the hololiths and understood what the outer screens had already learned. The gate was not under attack. The gate was ending. A transmission broke through the static, dragged screaming from the lower bands by the vengeful spirit's listening engines. It was Cadian, tight-beamed, meant for the defense net, not for traitor ears. Hold until relieved. Hold until dead. Hold because you are Cadian. The words passed through the strategium. Some of the Black Legion officers laughed, quietly, contemptuously. Men always spoke beautifully when they had no choices left. Abaddon did not laugh. He looked down upon the red mark of Cadia and felt something colder than respect move through him. Anticipation, the pleasureless recognition of a blade meeting armor worthy of the strike. They know, Zarafistan whispered. Blind eyes turned toward the planet. They know this is the hour. Good, Abaddon said. The first defense ring flickered across the hololith. Stations dead. Mine arcs spent. Picket squadrons broken or withdrawing under fire. Orbital platforms burning. Gaps opened in the web Cadia had trusted for 10,000 years. Behind the armada, the will of eternity moved. The corrupted Blackstone fortress slid into position with the terrible patience of a moon-learning hatred. Its shadow fell across lesser ships. Its angular silhouette drank starlight. Dark mechanicum engines flared along its wounded edges. Blackstone harmonics pulsed through the void, deep enough to make mortal hearts stutter and machine spirits recoil. Cadia still turned below, armored, defiant, bright with gunfire. Abaddon watched the first true breach open in the gate's outer skin. "Begin surface war," he said. The order passed into the fleet, and the void filled with falling fire. The will of eternity did not possess corridors in the manner of human vessels. Its internal passages were wounds cut through geometry. They bent where no sane architecture should bend, ascending and descending in the same stride, narrowing into throat-like channels before opening into vaults vast enough to house cathedrals. Walls of Blackstone drank lumen light without reflection. Engraved surfaces shifted when unobserved, their angles altering by imperceptible degrees, as if the fortress resented being mapped by human thought. Gravity held only by negotiation. In one passage, blood crawled along the ceiling in trembling beads. In another, chains hung sideways from the walls, each link drawn taut by a different law of weight. Men who walked there too long learned to distrust their eyes, then their memories, then the distinction between prayer and screaming. Abaddon walked through it without hesitation. His Terminator plate growled with every tread, boots striking alien flooring that rang like a struck bell beneath him. The talon of Horus flexed at his side, its claws scraping once along the Blackstone wall. The sound that followed was not metal against stone. It was deeper, colder, like a blade drawn across the inside of a skull. The fortress answered. A pulse moved through the passage. No light accompanied it, no sound that mortal ears could properly name. The slaves behind him staggered, clutching at their heads. One fell to his knees, vomited black fluid into his rebreather, and began reciting a childhood hymn to the Emperor in a voice high with terror. A black legionary escort killed him with a bolt round before the second line could leave his mouth. The body remained kneeling for several seconds, headless, blood pattering upward from the neck stump, before gravity corrected itself and dragged the ruin down. Abaddon did not look back. The will of eternity had been many things before it became his. A weapon from an age mankind had no right to understand. A Blackstone fortress, planetoid in scale, older than the Imperium's lies, older than the priesthoods that now crawled through its veins with sensors of burning fat and scrap code. Its original builders were dust or legend. Its purpose had been argued over by savants, Xenos hunters, and madmen. Abaddon cared nothing for their academic cowardice. He judged things by use, and this fortress could wound reality, not merely break ships, not merely burn continents. It could strike at the skin between real space and the Empyrean. It could amplify the storm or silence it. It could become a key, a blade, a hammer, or a falling god. He had taken it from the graveyard of old wars and dragged it into the long war's service. He had fed it slaves, sorcery, machine litanies, demonic bargains, and the will of the Black Legion. Still, it resisted him. That was why he valued it. Obedient weapons were tools. Defiant weapons were conquered enemies, and conquered enemies remembered the hand that broke them. Dravura Morkath waited at the threshold of the engine vault. The chamber beyond her was a vertical abyss, filled with machinery that no human forge had birthed. Blackstone ribs descended into darkness, each one threaded with brass conduits, iron sutures, and veins of pulsing warp light. Suspended platforms hung at angles that made the eye ache. Dark Mechanicum priests moved along them in processions of rust-red robes, their augmetics clicking, their mechadendrites dripping oil, blood, and sanctified filth. They chanted in scrap code, spitting corrupted Binharic into the alien machines, each phrase a blasphemous parody of the Martian cant they had once revered. Bound psychers screamed from brass sarcophagi set into the walls. Their skulls had been opened and laced with conductive wire. Their mouths were held wide by iron clamps. Some had no tongues left, but still they screamed. Warp fire passed through them in pulses, burning their souls down like candles. When one failed, his eyes burst into steam, and his body collapsed into ash inside the restraint cage. A servitor arm removed the remains. Another body was shoved into place before the cage had cooled. Morkath bowed, but not deeply. "My Lord Warmaster." Her voice carried two harmonics. One was human, low and controlled. The other came from the fortress itself, a subterranean vibration that made the deck quiver beneath Abaddon's boots. "Report. The fortress obeys imperfectly. Then your opening words displease me." Morkath did not flinch. That too was why she remained useful. The Blackstone heart resists full corruption. It accepts command impulses through the choir spines and my own communion, but its deeper matrices refuse total surrender. The alien architecture redirects invasive scrap code. Demonic pressure causes instability if sustained beyond tolerance. The fortress can be forced, but not trusted. Abaddon looked past her into the abyss. A priest of the Dark Mechanicum raised both arms and shrieked a string of Binharic praise. The machine answered by folding him inward. His spine snapped backward. His augmetics tore free in sparks. His robe ignited. The thing that had been a priest became a knot of meat, cables, and broken metal, then dropped into the shaft below. The chanting did not pause. "Trust is for brothers," Abaddon said. "I require function." Morkath's eyes were black, not with simple darkness, but with absence. Cables vanished beneath the armor at her throat, disappearing into flesh that had been cut and remade too many times to remain wholly mortal. "Function can be maintained through me. And if you fail, then the fortress will choose its own interpretation of your command." For the first time since entering the chamber, Abaddon looked directly at her. Morkath held his gaze. The talon of Horus opened and closed with a soft hydraulic snarl. "See that it does not. As you command." He left her standing at the lip of the engine vault and descended into the slave spines. There were no maps for that place. There were only screams, cables, and heat. The slave spines ran through the will of eternity like infected nerves. They were not built for movement. They were built for consumption. Human bodies had been inserted into the fortress wherever flesh proved more adaptable than machinery. Failed navigators sat nailed into brass thrones, their third eyes sewn shut with wire and lead seals, their heads locked back to stare into darkness only they could see. Some muttered roots through the warp. Some begged for blindness. Some laughed until their throats split. Tech adepts hung in rows, reduced to data-feeding organs. Their limbs had been removed. Their torsos were bolted into iron frames. Cables entered their mouths, ears, spines, and empty eye sockets. Their remaining fingers twitched over rune plates they could no longer see. Each fed fragments of shield telemetry, gravity balance, energy bleed, and Blackstone resonance into cogitator engines that hated them. Mortal crews crowded the maintenance catacombs below, packed so tightly into heat-slick passages that many could not sit, only lean against one another and wait for their shift, their death, or the moment hunger made them bite. They wore chain collars stamped with the eye. Some had been born aboard the fleet and knew no sky. Some had once been Imperial ratings captured in raids, their old loyalty carved out through fear, starvation, and work. None would leave the fortress, not in triumph, not in retreat, not in death, unless the ship's reclamation engines missed them. Abaddon walked among them, and they lowered their eyes as if the darkness itself had entered. One slave failed to bow quickly enough. A legionary behind Abaddon seized him by the back of the skull and crushed his face into the deck. Teeth scattered. Blood spread in a thin film. The man made a sound like an animal beneath a boot. "Leave him," Abaddon said. The legionary stopped. The slave trembled, choking through a broken mouth. Let him work with the pain. They moved on. At the Central Intelligence Nave, Cadia's siren waited amid suspended skin scrolls, lumen-hazed data panes, and interrogation reliquaries that still dripped. The chamber smelled of hot metal, antiseptic, fear, and opened bodies. Siren had removed his helm. His face was pale, severe, almost monkish, except for the dried blood beneath his fingernails and the small surgical hooks hanging from his belt. "Warmaster," he said, "speak." Siren gestured, and the air filled with captured Cadia. Casa networks unfolded in red and white. Shield grids shimmered in layered arcs. Orbital coordination nodes pulsed like exposed organs. Pylon locations appeared as dark marks that resisted the hololithic projection, voids within the light. Counter-strike routes crawled outward from casas and subterranean transit arteries. Names accompanied them: officers, colonels, generals, Vox commanders, artillery masters, tank marshals, men with enough competence to matter. This intelligence was taken from prisoners recovered during the outer engagement and from prior infiltrations, Siren said. 3 naval captains, 2 astropathic handlers, 1 Casa adjutant, several lesser officers, 1 Mechanicus Magos, who endured longer than anticipated. Did they lie? All did. Eventually, none did. Abaddon studied the display. Cadia's shield grids overlapped better than expected. Its casters were not isolated fortress cities, but organs of a single defensive beast. The surface lines were only the visible layer. Beneath them ran ammunition arteries, troop routes, data channels, fallback vaults, and command redundancies. Even wounded, the world could continue fighting through severed limbs. His gaze settled on the pylons. They were not bright on the hololith. They were absences, places where the projection thinned and recoiled. Ancient Blackstone structures, half understood by the Imperium that squatted around them like vermin nesting beside a sleeping engine. For 10,000 years, those silent monoliths had strengthened reality at the edge of the eye. They had denied the warp its full hunger. They had made Cadia more than stone, guns, and men. They were the true enemy. Not creed, not the Cadian regiments, not the Imperial navy burning in the void, not the priests shrieking under Aquilas. All of them were flesh and habit. The pylons were older than their courage. They did not fear. They did not tire. They did not pray. Abaddon hated them, and beneath the hatred, he felt fascination. What would happen, he asked, if the primary pylon fields were overloaded rather than silenced? Siren glanced to one of his data panes. Theoretical models conflict. Some indicate local null collapse. Some indicate catastrophic real space stabilization. Others suggest destructive harmonic backlash through connected arrays. Useful uncertainty, Abaddon said. The defenders may attempt activation under extreme pressure. They will. Siren inclined his head. Then the pressure must be shaped. Abaddon looked toward the fortress's firing command. Bring the weapon to readiness. The will of eternity heard him before the order was relayed. Far above, below, and around him, the fortress changed pitch. Choirs of bound psychers screamed in new harmonies. Dark Mechanicum priests fell to their knees, vomiting code into vox grills. Slave crews were driven into motion by shock lashes and chain blades. The Blackstone ribs of the fortress drank warp light and bled it back as a gathering radiance that had no color fit for mortal sight. Abaddon returned to the command vault as the weapon woke. The viewing aperture did not show space as eyes should see it. It showed significance. Cadia hung below, armored in shields and fire. The orbital war still raged around it, but for a moment the planet seemed alone, suspended beneath judgment. Not the pylons, Siren said softly, understanding the target pattern. Not yet. No, Abaddon replied. If we strike the throat before the beast is pinned, it may bite. Morkath's voice entered the chamber through every grill at once. Primary discharge aligned, fortress obedience within acceptable thresholds, warp pressure unstable but contained. Fire. The will of eternity fired. There was no recoil in the human sense. The fortress did not kick like a gun. It convulsed like a god suppressing nausea. Blackstone veins flared. Warp energy lensed through alien matrices. Bound psychers died in rows. Their souls burned clean out of their bodies. In the engine vaults, 3 priests became columns of ash. Across maintenance decks, slaves collapsed with blood pouring from their ears. Gravity inverted for one breath, flinging men into ceilings and snapping necks before correcting. The beam descended upon Cadia. It struck a shielded district outside a fortress city, whose name meant endurance in the local tongue. Void shields flared, layered fields blooming like pale domes beneath the impact. For several seconds, the district survived. Its generators howled. Its priests screamed praise. Its officers ordered evacuation routes sealed and guns maintained. Then the shields failed. The city became glass. Bastions vaporized. Hab blocks vanished. Armored roads liquefied and ran in glowing rivers. Men were reduced to shadows burned permanently into ferrocrete. Tanks became molten shapes, their crews cooked inside sealed hulls. A cathedral fortress lost its upper spires in an instant, bells falling as liquid metal through the nave. The beam carved onward, not drilling randomly, but cutting across relay nodes, command shelters, orbital uplink towers, and shield substations that Siren's stolen intelligence had marked hours before. Secondary detonations rolled across the surface. Munitions vaults erupted. Vox spires collapsed. Akasa lost contact with 3 outer bastions and immediately shifted to redundant command. Abaddon watched the fallback pattern appear. There. Cadia reacted, wounded but disciplined. Its reserves did not panic. Its commanders did not waste strength trying to save what was already dead. They sealed the wound, redirected command, shifted artillery control to buried nodes, activated routes Siren had predicted but not confirmed. Abaddon saw them now. Again? Morkath asked through the fortress. No. Several officers turned slightly toward him, though none spoke. Abaddon watched the burning district cool into black glass. Spectacle is a child's indulgence, he said. One shot has shown us 4 hidden routes, 2 reserve command chains, and the limits of their western shield grid. Let them believe the fortress is conserving power. Let them move what they think I have not seen. Siren's thin mouth twitched. Creed will not overcommit. Not yet. Below, Cadia burned. Its cities bled smoke into a sky already bruised by war. Its bastions died, and other bastions took up their fire. Its soldiers vanished by the thousands, and other soldiers stepped into their places. The planet did not scream, as lesser worlds screamed. It clenched its teeth. It endured the wound, and kept aiming its guns upward. Abaddon looked upon it, and understood. Fear would not kill Cadia. Fire would not kill Cadia quickly enough. Even the will of eternity, for all its ancient malice and reality wounding. Power could not simply terrify this world into collapse. Cadia had been raised beneath the eye. Its children had learned to name nightmares before they learned mercy. Its officers had expected death since birth. Its regiments would stand in ash, deafened and bleeding, and still wait for coordinates. Very well. A lock did not fear the hand. A lock had to be broken piece by piece, pin by pin, tooth by tooth, until the mechanism failed and the door came open. Abaddon turned from the burning world. "Begin the next phase," he said. "Make them spend blood for every breath." Cadia filled the strategium hololith like a clenched fist of iron and stone. From orbit, it did not resemble a world so much as a weapon that had learned to wear continents as armor. Fortress cities rose from the surface, like black mountains hammered into shape by 10,000 years of paranoia. Casas bristled with gun spires, shield towers, command bastions, missile silos, and cathedral fortresses whose stained glass had long ago been replaced with armor glass thick enough to turn shrapnel. Around them stretched trench belts visible from the upper atmosphere, ring after ring of gouged earth, ferrocrete revetments, bunker lines, razor wire labyrinths, minefields, and tank corridors designed to funnel invaders into overlapping fire. The hololith marked the artillery grids in layered crimson. Then more grids appeared beneath them, then more beneath those. Cadia did not defend in lines. It defended in depths. Every killing field concealed another. Every fallback route was covered by hidden guns. Every road wide enough for armor had already been measured by Cadian rangefinders, sanctified by Munitorum surveyors, and registered by batteries waiting in buried casemates. Void-shielded bastions glimmered like dull pearls across the projection. Some had already dimmed beneath the will of eternity's first strategic strike, but most remained active, linked by relay spines and emergency command arteries. Between them, armored formations crawled like insects through prepared corridors. Lehman Russ battle tanks, chimeras, basilisk carriers, hydra batteries, baneblades in reserve shelters, their engine spirits waking under the lash of tech priests and the prayers of crews who would rather burn inside their tanks than reverse from the line. The pylon zones were marked in black, not red, not gold, not any color of command priority, known to the fleets of the Long War. Black, absences in the hololith, voids where the image seemed thin and wrong, as if the projection itself recoiled from rendering them. Abaddon's gaze returned to those marks again and again. Around each pylon cluster, the Imperials had concentrated shields, artillery, and mobile reserves. They did not fully understand what they guarded. That made no difference. Ignorance had never prevented mankind from worshipping a useful prison. "The surface defense remains coherent," Cadia's siren said, from the shadow of the command dais. "Western Command suffered degradation after the fortress strike. Secondary nodes assumed control within expected tolerance. No general rout, no significant collapse in Vox discipline." Abaddon said nothing. The hololith magnified a fortress city. Casa, walls within walls, streets too straight to be civilian, hab blocks reinforced for urban warfare, transit ways large enough for tanks, courtyards designed as muster grounds and kill zones alike. Under the red wash of projection, thousands of Imperial markers moved in disciplined streams, Cadian shock troops in their endless ranks, Kasrkin moving as hard, bright knots of elite resistance, white shields assigned to duties they were old enough to understand and young enough to obey without hesitation. Astra Militarum reinforcements from off-world regiments, less perfect than Cadians, more afraid, but still useful meat in the corpse god's uniform. Adeptus Mechanicus maniples threaded through generator sanctums and artillery shrines. Astartes Praeses kill teams, few in number, but dangerous in the way all loyalist transhumans were dangerous when cornered. Adepta Sororitas forces gathered around shrine fortresses and relic sites, faith hardening where strategy frayed. Fortress command personnel moved through it all with the clipped, brutal efficiency of men born inside a gun barrel and raised to believe the recoil was a lullaby. Abaddon did not underestimate them. Only fools underestimated Cadia. Only lesser warlords called courage weakness, because they had never learned to turn courage into a predictable mechanism. The Cadians were servants of a dead empire, yes. They knelt to a corpse enthroned on terror. They wore the Aquila and died for masters who would record them as numbers in dust-thick ledgers. But they were not soft. They were not ornamental. They were useful, disciplined, stubborn, purpose-built by geography, fear, and imperial necessity. That was why he hated them. Not because they could stop him. They could not. He hated them because they had mythic value. Cadia was not merely defended by soldiers. Cadia was defended by an idea. The gate stands. The eye is held. The emperor protects. Every lie mankind told itself had been hammered into Cadian steel, stamped into Cadian armor, drilled into Cadian bones. Break the world, and the Imperium would mourn. Break the idea, and the Imperium would bleed in ways no medici could staunch. "Commence descent waves," Abaddon said. Across the Armada, launch bays opened. The void between fleet and world filled with falling shapes. Dreadclaws spat from the bellies of strike cruisers, their taloned hulls rotating as they dropped through flak and burning debris. Assault claws followed, black and red, their guidance spirits howling as they sought bastion roofs, shield gaps, and command trenches. Corrupted drop caskets tumbled downward, some containing legionaries, others containing things that had once worn armor before mutation, and worship remade them. Plague canisters fell like diseased rain, each one trailing green vapor, and corpse flies frozen in its wake. Traitor armor landers descended behind crude heat shields, engines screaming, hulls packed with tanks, ammunition, and crews whose souls belonged to the eye. Hell talons sliced ahead of the main wave, fast as blades, their lascannons stabbing at hydra nests and defense towers. Helldrakes followed them through the upper atmosphere, shrieking metal beasts with wings of iron and flame, diving into anti-air fire with the mad joy of predators that had forgotten they had once been machines. Then came the crude transports. They were not made for grace. They were made to fall, split, disgorge, and die. Their holds were crammed with screaming cult infantry, mutant levies, traitor militia, drugged penal hordes, beast packs, and chained chaos spawn thrashing against restraint hooks. Many had been promised glory. Many had been promised meat. Some had been promised only that the doors would open before they suffocated. Abaddon watched them descend. The first waves entered the kill zones. Cadia answered. The planet's guns woke in tears. Defense lasers speared upward through the clouds, cutting transports in half and leaving their burning carcasses to tumble into the lower atmosphere. Macro flak burst in black blossoms. Hydra batteries filled the sky with streams of tracer fire. Manticore missiles rose from hidden silos and punched into descending clusters, scattering bodies, wreckage, and burning fuel in wide red fans. Lascanon nests revealed themselves as brief, lethal flashes along ridgelines and bastion crowns. Mines detonated beneath the first landing craft that survived the approach, turning drop sites into volcanoes of dirt, armor plating, and shredded flesh. A transport full of cultists struck short of its intended zone. Its hull folded on impact. The rear doors burst outward under pressure from the bodies inside, spilling the living and dead together into the mud. Survivors staggered upright, screaming hymns to gods that were not listening, and ran toward the nearest Cadian line. Heavy bolters opened from concealed bunkers. The mob became red mist and tumbling limbs. Those behind kept running through the spray because frenzy, fear, and combat narcotics had burned away the instinct to stop. Another lander survived long enough to disgorge mutant infantry into a minefield. They came out bellowing, malformed bodies wrapped in scrap armor and flayed banners. The first rank vanished in a chain of explosions. The second stumbled over the holes and burst apart beneath mortar fire. The third reached the razor wire and hung there shrieking as Cadian flamers washed them in promethium. Abaddon marked the minefield density. A demon engine slammed down near a tank corridor, legs punching craters into ferrocrete. It roared through speakers made from skulls and furnace grills, its cannon arm vomiting. Shells into a trench line. For several heartbeats it advanced, tearing apart bunkers, crushing men beneath iron claws, dragging barbed chains through fleeing bodies. Then, 3 concealed Lascanon nests fired as one. Its shield failed. A basilisk battery struck it from beyond visual range. The demon engine disappeared inside a column of fire, its bound spirit shrieking across the Vox as its frame collapsed into molten ruin. Abaddon marked the Lascanon positions. Wyvern batteries shredded a flood of traitor militia, attempting to cross a broken plain. The shells burst above them and rained knives of metal downward. Men became opened bags of organs. Legs ran without torsos. Torsos crawled without understanding. They had lost everything below the ribs. The ground turned slick, then thick, then impassable. The next wave climbed over the bodies, boots sinking into torn flesh and shattered equipment. Abaddon marked the battery rhythm. This was not waste. This was reconnaissance written in meat. Let the unworthy die. Let the cults spend their madness. Let mutants discover the hidden mines with their feet and the hidden guns with their bones. Let traitor militia choke the trenches with bodies until Cadian firing steps vanished beneath carrion. Every corpse gave shape to the defense. Every failed charge drew a muzzle flash. Every burning transport revealed the angle of a gun. Eastern Bastion cluster adapts quickly, Siren said. Counter-battery response below projected delay. Commander unidentified. Find him. Assassination? If reachable. And if not. Abaddon looked at the hololithic icon as it redirected artillery with irritating precision. Orbital removal. The order passed. Moments later, a lance strike fell from the void. The Bastion's shield flared, held, then flickered under a second strike from a Black Legion cruiser whose captain had learned the cost of hesitation. The third strike punched through. The command tower vanished in white light. The artillery grid stuttered. Not much. Not enough to matter to a fool. enough for Abaddon to see the wound. Elsewhere, another Cadian officer shifted reserves too cleanly, closing a gap the World Eaters had not yet reached. "Name," Abaddon said. Siren's fingers moved across a data slate. "Unknown. Vox signature masked. Command origin triangulating. Delete the origin when found. No admiration, no honor, no warrior's courtesy. Efficiency in the enemy was a tumor. It was cut out." Across Cadia, the rival hosts of the Long War began their assigned labors. The Iron Warriors landed in furnace-lit precision behind the first sacrificial waves. Their siege engines descended on grav chutes and brutal landers, iron tracks grinding over the dead. Warsmiths marked angles, soil density, shield harmonics, range tolerances. Slaves were driven forward with shock mauls and chain whips, dragging armor plates and ammunition carts into place. The Iron Warriors did not roar. They built. They measured. They turned the battlefield into a calculation of collapse. The World Eaters gathered at the edge of a trench sector already drowned in blood. Their chain axes screamed idle threats. Their champions slammed helms against bulkheads and each other, frothing for release as Cadian shells burst among them. Some died before reaching the line, torn open by artillery. The survivors only laughed harder. A Cornete champion forced his way onto the command channel, voice thick with butcher's hunger. "Warmaster, enough falling meat. Give us the charge. Give us the walls. Give us skulls." Abaddon did not look away from the hololith. "You will have your skulls when I require a hill made from them." The channel filled with snarling breath. For a moment, the champion's rage pressed against obedience. Then he yielded, as the Warmaster wills. Death Guard formations made planetfall in clouds of rot. Their landers split open like infected boils, releasing bloated legionaries, plague zombies, rusted armor, and crawling fog that settled into trenches and shell holes. Where they passed, metal sweated, rebreathers clogged. Wounded men died badly and did not always remain still. Night Lords seized Vox towers and relay stations in the darkening sectors, not by mass assault, but by sudden absence, by lumen failure, by knives in command bunkers, by officers found hanging from antennae arrays with their mouths wired open around stolen Vox speakers. Soon, Cadian channels began to carry screams beneath the orders, not loud enough to drown command, loud enough to poison silence. Word-bearers gathered around damaged pylon approaches, raising icons, cutting sigils into stone, and chanting scripture that made mortal slaves bleed from the eyes. The Blackstone resisted them. Possessed cultists convulsed in its shadow, clawing at their own faces as if trying to dig out the part of them that heard the warp. The word-bearers called this revelation. Abaddon called it testing. The Emperor's children descended where captives could be taken and sensations harvested. Their bright armor flashed obscenely amid smoke and ash. They moved with beautiful precision and poisonous indiscipline. Abaddon watched them carefully. Desire was a blade with no handle, and through it all, the Black Legion held the true objectives. Chosen squads moved behind the noise, not chasing glory, not wasting ammunition on already doomed trenches. They took relay nodes. They marked pylon approaches. They secured landing corridors for heavier assets. Terminators stood immovable around command beacons, while lesser warbands threw themselves into Cadia's guns and mistook dying loudly for victory. The day bled into night. On Cadia, night did not bring darkness. The sky burned too brightly for that. Falling wreckage drew lines of fire across the clouds. Lance strikes flashed like false dawns. The horizon throbbed red where Prometheum fields burned. Artillery lit the trench belts in pulses, showing brief images of apocalypse. Men firing from behind barricades of their dead. Mutants drowning in shell craters, filled with blood and chemical runoff. Tanks grinding over bodies because there was no other road. Priests screaming until their voices failed. Vox officers whispering coordinates through broken teeth. Legionaries advancing through smoke like fragments of old nightmares. The trenches overflowed. Still, Cadia fought. Abaddon watched the world through the hololith, its surface alive with impact markers and casualty blooms. The first night of the ground war should have shaken a lesser planet into panic. Cadia only hardened. Its guns fired. Its Khazars held. Its officers adapted. Its soldiers died in formation. The warmaster smiled. A worthy fortress did not fall in silence. A worthy fortress screamed before it broke. Dawn did not rise over Cadia. It detonated. The horizon became a continuous wound of flame, red and white and chemical green, stitched by lance fire from orbit and torn open by artillery crawling across the world in rolling thunder. Smoke drowned the lowlands. Ash fell in curtains. The clouds were not clouds any longer, but the breath of burning engines, pulverized hab blocks, ruptured promethium reserves, and the boiled remains of men who had been alive when the bombardment began and were now only residue on the wind. Abaddon watched the meat grinder open. From the strategium of the vengeful spirit, Cadia's surface no longer resembled a map. It resembled a body under dissection. Trench belts pulsed red with casualty runes. Bastion icons flickered, vanished, returned under redundant command, then vanished again beneath bombardment. Iron Warriors' siege markers advanced by calculated increments. World Eaters' assault clusters surged and recoiled like arterial spray. Death Guard contagion zones spread in slow, greasy blooms. Night Lord's terror patterns moved through communication networks as dark threads. Word-bearers' ritual concentrations formed around damaged pylon approaches and then distorted under null field resistance. The lesser warlords saw war. Abaddon saw pressure. Cadia's defense was not a wall. A wall could be broken by a hammer. Cadia was a layered machine of men, guns, tunnels, officers, faith, supply, fear, and ancient Blackstone. Strike one part, and another absorb the blow. Burn a bastion, and command rerouted beneath it. Flood a trench, and mines opened behind the flood. Kill an officer, and another voice was already on the vox, reciting firing coordinates with the calm of a man reading scripture. So he did not strike randomly. He applied hungers. The World Eaters were released first, where Cadia's trench belts narrowed between two shielded ridges. The terrain had been chosen by Iron Warriors' surveyors and confirmed by the deaths of 3 cultist waves. The Cadian line there bent, but had not broken, its fields of fire fierce, but predictable. Abaddon gave the order, and the Cornete packs hurled themselves into the smoke. They came beneath their own bombardment. Shells fell ahead of them, behind them, among them. Some were Cadian, some were traitor. The World Eaters did not care. They ran through impact geysers and shredded corpses, chain axes roaring, helms painted in old blood and fresh filth. Their vox was a storm of snarls, oaths to the blood god, and the thick, wet laughter of warriors who had long ago traded reason for momentum. A berserker took a shell fragment through the abdomen and kept running with his intestines hanging in a loop against his thigh. Another lost an arm to Lascannon Splash, seized his chain axe in his remaining fist, and used the stump of his shoulder to knock a slower warrior aside. The Cadians waited until they were inside the kill brackets. Then the trench line lit white. Lasguns fired in disciplined volleys. Not panic fire, not the wild stuttering of men who had lost their nerve. Rank fire, section fire, interlocking fire lanes that cut through smoke and ash in sheets of ruby light. Plasma traps opened from recessed pits, venting blue suns into the charging berserkers. Remote mines detonated beneath ceramite boots. Heavy bolters barked from bunker slits and punched mass-reactive death into transhuman bodies, blasting ribs outward, tearing helms open, reducing roaring faces to mist and bone chips. The World Eaters hit the first trench anyway. They came down like axes dropped by angry gods. Chain blades chewed through flak armor, lasguns, arms, throats, skulls. A Cadian sergeant emptied his pistol into a berserker's faceplate, cracked one lens, and was split from collarbone to groin for his defiance. Another officer ordered his own forward trench shelled, while traitor Marines were still among his men. The Vox capture reached the vengeful spirit in broken fragments. Grid Black 7. Danger close. Repeat. Danger close. Fire for effect. The answering barrage landed within heartbeats. The trench vanished under Earthshaker impacts. Cadians died with World Eaters on top of them. Berserkers died laughing, some still swinging while buried to the waist. The line became a crater full of meat, broken ceramite, severed limbs, burning uniforms, and weapons firing until hands went slack around triggers. Abaddon watched the ruin settle. "Mark the officer who gave that order," he said. Siren's gaunt fingers moved through the data haze. "Signal origin lost in bombardment." "Then mark the regiment." The Death Guard advanced where the trenches ran low and wet. They did not charge. They arrived. Rust fog rolled ahead of them, thick as breath inside a sealed tomb. It slid into dugouts, crawled under bunker doors, seeped through cracked rebreather seals and prayer cloth masks. Corpse flies came with it, fat and black, their wings humming in diseased harmony. Cadian sentries fired into the fog until their barrels glowed, and still shapes moved within it. Bloated silhouettes, horned helms, pitted armor dripping fluids that smoked on the ground. Bells tolled from somewhere inside the murk. A medici station behind the line received the first contaminated wounded. Men came in coughing blood and brown foam. Their armor seals had rotted shut or rotted open. Skin sloughed beneath gloves, eyes yellowed, teeth loosened in gums. The medici officers worked until their own hands began to blister inside surgical gauntlets. Then the dead sat up. One corpse rose from an operating slab with its ribcage open and its lungs still in the chirurgeon's hands. Another dragged itself across the floor with no legs, biting through a trooper's boot and into the ankle beneath. Panic should have taken the station. Instead, a Cadian lieutenant ordered the doors sealed and burned the entire triage chamber with promethium, wounded and dead alike. His final Vox transmission was steady until the flames reached him. Contagion contained. Emperor, witness our duty. The Death Guard took the sector by inches. Every inch cost them shells, fire, plasma, and stubborn men. Every inch they took became unclean. To the north, Iron Warriors' siege crawlers ground forward beneath shielded plates and smoke launchers. They moved with the patience of execution engines. Corrupted artillery squatted behind them, barrels elevated, recoil pistons slick with oil and blood. Slave labor dragged ammunition chains through mud, irradiated by leaking reactors. The slaves were shackled to the engines in living lines. When shrapnel came, they absorbed it. When radiation alarms shrieked, they blistered, vomited, and continued pulling until they died standing and were dragged along by those still moving. The Iron Warriors did not waste voices on them. Their warsmiths calculated, corrected, fired. Bastion walls cracked under bunker-buster shells. Shielded gun platforms advanced behind overlapping fields. Trench mouths collapsed. Cadian counter-battery fire answered with brutal accuracy, smashing crawler legs, detonating ammunition carts, turning slave gangs into red steam. The Iron Warriors adjusted. They always adjusted. Siege was not passion. Siege was arithmetic with corpses as numerals. Abaddon approved of them only because they did not ask him to admire them. The Night Lords moved where sleep had already died. They did not seize great bastions or hold glorious lines. They entered damaged communication towers, underhive relay ducts, and half-collapsed Vox shrines. Lumen failed before they struck. Picked feeds showed empty corridors, then blood across the lens, then the face of an officer without skin whispering orders in a stolen voice. Captured Vox relays began broadcasting the screams of dying men beneath authentic Cadian command chatter. Not enough to render the orders useless. Enough to make every listener wonder whether the voice beneath the static belonged to someone he had known. At antennae arrays overlooking a reserve mustering yard, Flayed officers hung from the spars, their mouths wired open around active speakers. The Night Lords left them alive for as long as biology allowed. Their pain carried across the lower bands. Cadian commanders cut the channel. The Night Lords rerouted it through emergency frequencies. Cadian engineers purged those. The Night Lords found others. They were not trying to win ground. They were trying to make silence impossible. Around the damaged pylon approaches, the word-bearers began their rites. They came in crimson, chanting, crozius mauls raised, scriptures nailed into armor and flesh. Their dark apostles drove cultists ahead of them in chains, each mortal painted with sigils and stuffed with relic shards, bone charms, and parasite icons. They carved runes into the ground with knives made from saint bones. They poured blood into prepared channels. They spoke the names of the gods in sequences that made the air tremble. The Blackstone resisted. The effect was immediate and obscene. Possessed cultists convulsed as if invisible hands had seized them from within. Horns cracked, mutated limbs twisted backward, eyes burst into black vapor. Some screamed prayers to the dark gods and received only silence. Others caught fire without flame, their bodies charring from the bones outward. A hulking, possessed champion staggered into the shadow of a pylon shard and began clawing at his own face, tearing through skin, muscle, and cheekbone until his fingers scraped his teeth from the side. The word-bearers called it trial, revelation, holy opposition. Abaddon called it proof. The pylons were not sleeping stones. They were active denial. Reality made architecture. Silence given edge. The Emperor's children failed him first. Their assigned objective was a relay complex on the edge of a pylon-adjacent defense zone, a minor installation by outward appearance, but one Siren's interrogations had identified as a reserve command artery. It needed to be taken intact or destroyed before the next coordinated assault. Instead, the Emperor's children lord commanding the detachment diverted into a refugee transit vault beneath the relay. Thousands of non-combatant personnel, administratum clerks, adepts, wounded soldiers, and Casa dependents had been sheltering there under guard. The Lord chose captives over command. Abaddon saw the deviation as a violet bruise on the hololith. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he ordered teleport lock. The strategium vanished in black lightning and reformed around him as a corridor beneath Cadia's surface, where alarms wailed and the air tasted of dust, blood, and perfume too sweet for war. His Justarin came with him, black-armored giants materializing in thunderclaps of displaced air. Mortals nearby burst from the pressure change, their lungs and eyes rupturing. Emperor's children legionaries turned, startled, blades wet, laughter dying in their throats. Their lord stood at the center of the vault entrance in armor of pearl and bruised gold. His helm hung at his hip. His face was beautiful in the way poisoned things were beautiful, every feature sharpened by surgical arrogance and excess. Behind him, his warriors had already abandoned the relay approach. The air was full of screams. "Warmaster," the Lord said, smiling as if greeting a guest at a feast. "The objective is secured in spirit. These souls will make exquisite offerings. Their fear is quite unlike the trench stock, refined, layered." Abaddon crossed the distance between them. The Lord's smile faltered only when the talon closed around his throat. He tried to speak, perhaps to explain, perhaps to plead, perhaps to invoke some patron of sensation and pride. The talon tightened before the words could become shape. Ceramite collar rings cracked, vertebrae compressed. The Lord's eyes bulged, not with fear at first, but indignation. That pleased Abaddon less than fear would have. "You have mistaken permission for freedom," Abaddon said. The Emperor's children around them shifted, hands near blades, sonic weapons, needle pistols. The Justarin raised their guns. Abaddon lifted the Lord from the ground and crushed slowly. The sound was intimate, wet cartilage, splintering bone, armor deforming around flesh. The Lord kicked once, twice, then thrashed as the talon's claws pierced the gorget and sank into his neck. Blood ran down Abaddon's gauntlet in dark threads. The beautiful face purpled, split, and lost all artifice. When the head tore free, it came with strings of meat and broken metal. Abaddon threw it at the nearest Emperor's Children champion. It struck his chestplate and slid down, leaving a shining smear. "The relay," Abaddon said, "or annihilation." No one moved. His voice dropped lower. "Choose quickly." The Emperor's Children chose obedience. They turned from the vault and moved toward the objective, their former lord's blood drying on the floor behind them. Abaddon did not remain to watch. A commander who needed to stare at obedience had already lost authority. He returned to the vengeful spirit as the relay complex fell beneath disciplined violence that should have been spent there from the beginning. Cadia still refused to break. Every fallen line became another line. Trenches overrun by world eaters became pre-sighted bombardment zones. Bunkers breached by plague troops detonated their own magazines. Iron warriors who took a wall found a second wall behind it, lower, uglier, and better covered by hidden guns. Night lords who poisoned Vox channels found Cadian officers issuing orders through runners, light code, artillery patterns, and pre-arranged dead man protocols. Word bearers who tried to profane the pylons found their rights strangled by Blackstone's silence. Dead officers were replaced, not mourned, replaced. A colonel died when his command Chimera took a Lascanon strike. His adjutant assumed command before the wreck finished burning. The adjutant died to Night Lords minutes later. A captain took the frequency and began issuing the same fire plan with the same cadence. That captain bled out beneath a collapsed bunker roof. A lieutenant, coughing dust and blood, picked up the handset and continued the coordinates from the last spoken digit. Abaddon listened to the chain of voices with narrowing eyes. This was why Cadia mattered. Not because it was invincible. No world was invincible. Not because its people were pure. Purity was a lie told by priests to make obedience taste sacred. Cadia mattered because it had turned defiance into infrastructure. Its courage did not depend on heroes. It was drilled into systems, ranks, fallback plans, ammunition stores, and children who could strip a laser gun before they knew softness. Chaos was not that. Chaos was hunger, hatred, ambition, decay, revelation, excess, and rage. It was not unity. It did not want unity. The gods themselves were knives drawn against one another in the dark. The legions remembered brotherhood only as a wound. Every warband carried betrayal in its blood. Abaddon did not need them loyal. Loyalty was brittle. Faith was noisy. Love was useless. He needed them aimed. Directed hatred could do what unity pretended to do. World eaters into trenches. Death Guard into low ground. Iron warriors into walls. Night lords into fear. Word bearers into resistance. Emperor's children, where their vanity could be spent before it metastasized. Black Legion, where the true work waited. He looked again at the black marks around the pylon zones. "Warmaster," Siren said. "The null field approaches remain contested. Losses severe. The defenders reinforce faster than projected. Krathos, awaiting release with the hounds." Abaddon watched a trench sector disappear beneath bombardment, then reappear as Cadian reserve icons moved through smoke into the gap. "Send them." Siren bowed his head and transmitted the order. Far below, among the blood-choked approaches to Cadia's ancient Blackstone fields, the hounds of Abaddon began to move. Their icons flared across the hololith like fresh wounds. With them came Krathos, a blade of rage in service to a colder will, hurled toward the null field teeth of the world. The pylons had to be reached, no matter how many bodies were spent. Casacraft did not rise from Cadia's surface. It had been driven into it. The fortress was a mountain of adamantium, ferrocrete, gunmetal, and ancestral hatred, built downward as much as upward, layered through rock and bone like a weapon buried in the planet's flesh. Its outer walls formed only the first lie. Behind them were secondary walls, then tertiary walls, then sunken bastions, retractable barricades, blast gates, armored plazas, and narrow avenues whose sight lines had been measured before most of their defenders' grandsires had drawn breath. Every street was a kill corridor. Every hab block was a firing position. Every chapel was a munitions cache with candles. Every transit tunnel could be sealed, flooded with promethium, collapsed, or turned into a funnel for lasfire and grenades. Beneath the casa lay command vaults hardened against orbital fire. Beneath those were artillery catacombs, where earthshaker shells rolled on clanking feeder tracks and sweating crews worked in the thunder until their ears bled. Beneath those were shield generators, water reserves, medici crypts, armor hangars, gene vaults of regimental lineage, and emergency command shrines whose walls were carved with the names of the dead. Shielded transitways linked bastion to bastion through the understone, allowing entire companies to vanish from one front and appear at another without ever seeing the sky. Abaddon studied it as a butcher studies a living beast. Casa Kraf was more than a fortress. That was the weakness in the minds of lesser commanders. They would have seen walls and wanted them broken. They would have seen guns and wanted them silenced. They would have seen banners and wanted them burned. Abaddon saw a knot. Morale, logistics, command, artillery control, reserve movement, orbital coordination, and pylon-linked resistance were bound together there. Casa Kraf did not merely hold ground. It made the surrounding ground matter. It gave broken lines somewhere to fall back toward. It gave officers confidence that command still existed. It gave artillery a heart to beat from. It gave dying men a direction in which to crawl. If Casa Kraf fell, Cadia would bleed faster. If Casa Kraf held, Cadia remained a weapon. The hololithic display aboard the Vengeful Spirit rendered the fortress in layers of red, black, and cold white. Abaddon dismissed the surface projection and called up the deeper intelligence Siren had torn from prisoners, captured cogitators, dead vox traffic, and the twitching remains of minds that had not wished to speak. Tunnel routes shimmered. Hidden batteries appeared as uncertain glyphs. Shield harmonics flickered and altered in response to bombardment. Pylon influence zones pressed against the projection like bruises in reality. Around the fortress, the hounds of Abaddon advanced. Krathos led them through a storm made from artillery and spite. The first shells struck before his vanguard crested the broken ridge. The earth leapt upward in columns of fire. Berserkers vanished in fragments of red armor and darker meat. Demonkin were hurled through the smoke, their mutated limbs spinning apart, their howls lost beneath the hammering of Cadian guns. Armored shock formations pushed behind them, land raiders and corrupted assault tanks grinding through crater fields, while shells burst against their hulls, blasting chunks from blackened ceramite and pitted iron. Krathos did not slow. He was a moving wound in the world, a champion of rage bound to Abaddon's design, whether he liked the shape of the chain or not. His axe roared in his fists. His warband surged around him, World Eaters and Black Legion berserkers crashing forward in a tide of chain blades, brass icons, and butcher's devotion. The hounds did not advance as soldiers. They advanced as a punishment released from a cage. Cadian artillery fell in prearranged curtains. Basilisk shells walked across the approach routes. Manticores screamed down from hidden racks. Mortars burst above the charge and filled the air with razor fragments. Lascannons stabbed through the smoke at command tanks and banner carriers. Heavy bolters chewed apart the lesser packs. The defenders did not shoot at everything. They shot at what mattered, then what moved into the space left by what mattered. Their discipline was cold enough to offend. Abaddon watched casualty runes bloom across the hololith. Red spread like spilled ink. Warband icons flickered, guttered, disappeared. A pack of demonkin reached the first anti-tank ditch and died when the floor opened beneath them into a mine sump. A corrupted predator punched through a barricade and was gutted by melter fire from a concealed bunker, its turret spinning away in a halo of flame. 3 assault claws struck the inner ridge. 1 exploded on impact. 1 was torn open by plasma fire before its doors could unlock. The 3rd disgorged terminators into a storm of hot-shot lasfire and demolition charges. Every loss spoke. There was a gun beneath the chapel ruin. There was a tunnel mouth under the manufactorum arch. There was a command relay inside the water tower that should have been abandoned. There, where the Cadian line bent but did not call for reinforcement, the defenders were either strongest or already dead. "Mark it," Abaddon said. Siren obeyed before the words finished leaving the warmaster's mouth. On the surface, the Kasrkin came out of hiding at close range. They were not numerous enough to stop the hounds. They knew it. That was what made them valuable to Cadia and irritating to Abaddon. They fought as men who had already accepted the cost and found it irrelevant. Black carapace armor, sealed visors, hotshot laser guns, melters, plasma charges, combat blades, and demolition packs. They appeared from sewer mouths, collapsed walls, buried sally ports, and smoke-blackened transit tunnels. They struck the flanks of elite traitors, killed officers, crippled armor, and withdrew before weight could be brought against them. A Kasrkin squad let a Demonkin pack pass within 10 paces before opening fire from a collapsed Habs sublevel. Hotshot beams punched through eye lenses, throat seals, armor joints. A melter blast turned a champion's torso into sagging slag inside his plate. The last 2 Cadians stayed behind long enough to arm a demolition charge. They died beneath chain axes, but the charge detonated while the traitors were still roaring over the bodies. The building folded inward and buried the entire pack under ferrocrete, steel rods, and burning dust. Another Kasrkin kill team ambushed Black Legion Chosen in an underpass choked with smoke. The first volley killed 2, which was more than mortal soldiers should have managed. The Chosen responded with bolters and chain blades, reducing the ambushers to torn armor and red ruin. Yet by the time the passage was clear, the Cadians had delayed the advance by 4 minutes and forced a heavier unit into a narrower route already targeted by Earthshaker guns. No sane army would pay that price. Cadia paid it without hesitation. Abaddon watched and did not flinch. "Losses in the 3rd assault vector exceed projected tolerance," Siren said. "They reveal the fortress. They also preserve it. For now." Below, Krathos reached the outer murder zone. The ground before Kasr Kraf had been designed to kill armies, and now it performed its purpose with sacred precision. Retractable plates dropped away to expose spiked trenches filled with old corpses and new chemical fire. Bunkers opened from what had appeared to be solid rock. Minefields triggered in staggered sequence, not all at once, but in waves that caught the charging packs as they adapted. Vox static filled with Cornete rage, Cadian coordinates, machine warnings, and the gargling last breaths of men whose lungs had been shredded by shrapnel. Krathos broke the first gatehouse by throwing himself through it. His axe split the blast door's locking spine after siege. Melter softened the hinges. Berserkers flooded in behind him, and the fortress swallowed them. Inside Kasr Kraf, the war changed shape. There was no open battlefield now. There were corridors, stairwells, habitation stacks, armor alleys, manufactorum lanes, transit vaults, and chapel yards. Tanks fired down avenues at ranges so close their shells detonated before recoil smoke cleared. Lehman Russ battle tanks and corrupted armor faced one another across streets wide enough for only one machine to die at a time. A traitor tank rammed through a barricade, crushing a squad beneath its treads, only for a Cadian crew to fire point blank into its engine block from a side alley. Both vehicles vanished in the same blast, their crews cooked into black paste inside their hulls. Flamers washed hab blocks from both sides. Promethium rolled through rooms and stairwells, turning men into screaming torches. Some kept firing while they burned. A Cadian with no face crawled behind an ammunition crate and pulled the pin from a grenade bundle as legionaries forced the room. The explosion punched the floor out and dropped the attackers into the level below, where another squad waited with melter guns and cold eyes. Stairwells jammed with dead, not metaphorically. The bodies piled so thickly that warriors climbed over them as if ascending wet rubble. Boots sank into opened rib cages. Hands protruded from the mound, still clutching weapons. Blood ran down steps in sheets. A black legionary slipped, caught himself on a railing, and had half his helm burned away by a hot-shot beam fired from below. He answered with a bolt burst that turned the shooter into mist against the wall, then continued upward with one eye lens dark. In the artillery catacombs, Cadian crews kept firing even as the upper fortress was breached. Shells moved on conveyor tracks through tunnels shaking with impact. Servitors loaded, men loaded when servitors failed. When loaders died, officers took their place. When officers died, wounded men dragged shells with their remaining limbs. A traitor assault pack broke into one of the catacombs and found the crew waiting with laser guns, pistols, entrenching tools, and a priest holding a detonator. The priest's final words were lost beneath the ammunition cook-off. The catacomb became a sun under the earth. Abaddon saw the blast ripple through the hololithic underlayer. It destroyed one gun network, 2 reserve corridors, an entire traitor assault element, and a Cadian logistics artery that had been feeding 3 bastions. A loss for both sides, a deliberate one. Again, he said quietly, almost to himself. Cadia would cut off its own limbs to deny him purchase. Very well. Prepare crash insertions into the urban sectors. Siren looked up. Vectors are unstable. Anti-air remains severe. Survivability low. I did not ask for survival. The order went out. Above Casa Craft, damaged transports, obsolete landers, and chained bulk descent craft were driven into the atmosphere under escort from Hell Talons and Helldrakes. Their holds were filled with combat-drugged mutants, wretches armed with scrap blades, plague-tainted zombies, corpse-thin cult dregs, and chaos spawn chained to restraint pylons that had already begun to fail. Some vessels were piloted by slaves, wired directly into control thrones. Others were guided by demon spirits, promised release upon impact. They fell like disease bombs. Cadian anti-air fire gutted many before they reached the city. Those died usefully, scattering burning bodies across rooftops, blocking streets with wreckage, and drawing guns away from Urkrathos's main thrust. Others struck home. One transport smashed through 3 habitation towers before rupturing in a market square converted into a triage post. Its hull burst open and spilled a tide of drugged mutants into the wounded. The screaming began at once. Another crashed into a shielded transit hub, its cargo of zombies crawling from the wreckage aflame, biting and clawing until Cadian flamers turned the entire platform into an oven. A chaos spawn, huge and many-limbed, tore free from a broken restraint cage inside a manufacturum district. It killed the cultists nearest it first, then the mutants behind them, then anything else that moved. Cadians redirected an armored reserve to contain it. That was all Abaddon required. A reserve moved was a reserve unavailable. Elsewhere, pockets of horror opened across Casa Craft. The fortress did not break. It divided. That impressed him more. Siren approached the command dais, blood still wet across one gauntlet from whatever interrogation or correction had occupied him between reports. Enemy command remains functional. Abaddon's gaze remained on Casa Craft's inner layers. Continue. Evacuation contingencies remain possible. Not planetary, not yet, but regional fallback protocols are intact. Reserve command has not been severed. Morale degradation remains below expected models, despite urban breaches, plague exposure, Terra Vox contamination, and catastrophic casualties. Below expected models, Abaddon repeated. Yes, Warmaster. A lesser commander would have snarled. A god-drunk warlord would have cursed the corpse emperor, invoked the pantheon, demanded more blood, more fire, more immediate satisfaction. Abaddon felt only a darker interest unfolding within him. Cadia was proving why it mattered. Every hour it held made its death more valuable. Every impossible stand gave weight to the blow that would end it. If Casa Kraf had collapsed beneath the first true push, the fortress would have been a trophy. Because it resisted, it became a sermon. Because its men kept fighting after reason ended, their destruction would speak across the Imperium in a language even terror could understand. Strength did not lessen the worth of slaughter. Strength sanctified it. Warmaster, Morkath's voice came through the Strategium Vox, doubled by the deep harmonic of the will of eternity. The fortress can prepare another decisive strike. Power bleed remains severe but manageable. Blackstone compliance unstable. Targeting solutions available. The hololith shifted. Lines of possible fire speared down toward Casa Kraf's outer command rings, shield nodes, and pylon-adjacent defense fields. A single well-placed strike could shatter much of what the Cadians had preserved. It would not kill the Casa, not alone, but it would force the defenders into uglier choices. Abaddon considered. Then another alarm rune flared across the projection of the will of eternity. Siren turned sharply. Internal breach report. Morkath's harmonic voice fractured with static. The fortress spoke through her and beneath her, a low vibration like mountains grinding in the dark. Borders within the Blackstone interior, multiple points, transhuman signatures confirmed, Mechanicum intrusion rights detected, Fenrisian identifiers present. For the first time in hours, the Strategium grew still. Space wolves, Mechanicum, inside the will of eternity. Abaddon's eyes left Casa Kraf and settled on the fortress rune hanging above Cadia like a black moon with a knife in its heart. The world below bled, but endured. The weapon above had been breached. His smile faded, and the talon of Horus began to open. The will of eternity screamed in silence. That was the first truth the Borders learned when they forced entry through its wounded flanks. Sound died strangely inside the Blackstone fortress. Bolter reports cracked too late or too close. Chain blades howled and then seemed to swallow their own fury. Men shouted oaths and heard them return as whispers from corridors that should not have existed. The fortress took every noise, broke it, and fed it back wrong. The space wolves came through breaches torn by boarding torpedoes and teleport flares, grey armor smoking from the violence of insertion. Their pack markings were scored by void frost. Their pelts froze stiff in the airless sections. Their helms snarled with fanged respirator grills, and their bolters tracked the darkness with the hunger of hunters entering a beast's gut. They were loyalists, but nothing clean lived in their movements. They advanced as predators, not saints. They used scent, pack cant, auspex returns, old instinct, and stubborn hatred. Frost blades glimmered in Blackstone gloom. Chain blades revved low. The names of Fenrisian dead passed between them over the Vox like growled promises. With them came Mechanicum assault cadres, red-robed and iron-limbed, their Skitari escorts moving in precise lockstep, despite the shifting gravity. Servo skulls drifted ahead, their lenses glowing blue, their little suspensor engines whining as the fortress pulled at them from directions that had no name. Some froze in pockets of sudden void cold, their optics frosting blind before they shattered against unseen pressure gradients. Others continued their scans, chanting warning runes in clipped Binharic as they marked Blackstone conduits, corrupted plasma regulators, command interfaces, and machine arteries swollen by demonic infestation. The Borders had not come to claim the fortress. They had come to cripple it. They moved through a corridor where gravity failed every few breaths. Bodies floated there. Imperial armsmen from earlier clashes, slave crew, dark Mechanicum thralls, a Black Legion serf still clutching a data chain in hands stiff with frost, Blood hung in globules across the passage, red beads drifting among shell casings, teeth, strips of parchment, and broken lumen rods. The space wolves pushed through it, boots locking and unlocking by mag clamp, shoulders scraping the walls as the corridor narrowed. Then something crawled through the cable duct above them. It had once been human in the way ash had once been wood. Its limbs were too long, its skin threaded with copper wire, its face replaced by a mass of brass teeth and wet optics. It unfolded from the duct with insect patience and dropped onto the rearmost Skitarius, driving hooked fingers through the warrior's neck seals. Galvanic fire flashed. A frost blade cut upward. The thing came apart in black fluid and twitching wire, but not before its death scream carried into the walls and woke other shapes. The fortress began to answer. Demon things moved through service passages too small for Astartes' plate. Clawed silhouettes vanished behind grills. Hands pushed through cable bundles. Eyes opened in the Blackstone and closed when looked upon. Bulkheads sealed without command, splitting packs, isolating maniples, forcing hunters down routes that bent inward like veins. At the heart of the fortress, Abaddon received the breach reports without changing expression. The command vault shook around him. Far below, or above, or in a direction only the will of eternity understood, engines bled power into half-obedient Blackstone. Dravura Morkath's voice came through the vox in broken harmonics, one human and one vast, both strained. Boarding forces advancing through the tertiary regulator spines. Fenrisian transhuman elements confirmed. Mechanicum intrusion rights active in the plasma sanctums. Dark Mechanicum countercode engaged. The fortress is resisting both sides. Good, Abaddon said. Cacadia's siren turned from a hanging data slate. The surface strike is compromised while they remain inside. The surface strike is delayed, Abaddon said. Not compromised. Shall I commit the reserve Terminator cohorts? You will commit them. Siren inclined his head. Abaddon stepped down from the command dais. The strategium fell silent in the way a battlefield falls silent before the first shell lands. Black Legion officers did not ask where he was going. They knew. The Warmaster did not delegate the defense of this weapon, because the will of eternity was not a ship, not a fortress, not merely an asset in the cold ledgers of war. It was the execution blade held over Cadia's throat. A blade did not remain in another man's hand. Teleport lightning took him. He arrived inside a corridor of Blackstone and shattered brass, surrounded by the thunder of his Justarin. The Terminators materialized around him with brutal precision, combi bolters already raised, chain fists growling, trophy chains swinging against ancient plate. Sorcerous wards flared across their armor, runes bleeding cold light into the gloom. Chosen squads moved in behind them from adjoining passages, sealing routes with melter charges, gun lines, and murderously calm discipline. The first Imperial pack came at them through a junction choked with frozen vapor. The space wolves did not charge mindlessly. They struck in a wedge, bolters firing as they moved, one pack covering while another closed. Mass reactive shells burst against Black Legion plate. A Justarin staggered as rounds hammered his chest and cracked a gold-trimmed breastplate. He answered with a combi bolter burst that blew a loyalist's knee apart and spun him into the wall. The wounded wolf tried to rise on one leg, still firing. A chain fist took him from shoulder to hip. A Fenrisian with a frost axe crashed into Abaddon's left flank, roaring an oath through his vox grill. The blade struck the Warmaster's pauldron and carved a line of hoarfrost through black ceramite. The talon of Horus closed around the warrior's forearm before the second blow landed.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support really helps.
Abaddon crushed, armor folded, bone powdered. The frost axe fell, still humming. The space wolf headbutted him. Abaddon almost respected that. Drachnian came free. The demon blade did not simply cut. It remembered the first cut. It carried the shape of murder older than mankind's lies. and when Abaddon drove it through the Loyalist's torso, the blade passed through ceramite, fused ribs, secondary heart, and spine, as if all of them had been waiting to part. The Space Wolf died snarling, not screaming. Abaddon kicked him from the blade and moved on. "Seal the left artery," he voxed. "Drive them toward the regulator spine. Kill boxes by squads. No pursuit beyond marked thresholds." "By your will," came the answer. The Black Legion obeyed with a violence that had no waste in it. Terminators anchored intersections. Chosen fired from cross angles. Sorcerers raised wards that turned Mechanicum data pulses into sparks and shrieks. Chain fists tore open corridors, only to collapse them behind retreating Loyalists. Boarding routes became traps, then tombs. Yet the wolves kept coming. They fought like the legends said they fought, and like the legends rarely admitted. Savage, cunning, filthy with old hate. One pack feigned retreat through a gravity shear, drawing a chosen squad into a passage where the floor became the wall, and the wall became a killing slope. Another moved through a venting plasma crawl space no sane warrior would have crossed, losing 2 of their number to heat and radiation just to strike a dark Mechanicum shrine from behind. A wolf guard with half his helm torn away laughed blood through broken teeth while holding a doorway against 3 legionaries, long enough for Mechanicum adepts to clamp disruption engines onto the Blackstone core beneath the deck. In the plasma sanctums, the Mechanicum attackers fought their own war. They chanted binary prayers with the iron certainty of machine faith, their noospheric bursts stabbing into corrupted interfaces. Mechadendrites locked into control sockets. Rad carbines hissed. Arc weapons snapped blue-white across gantries. Dark Mechanicum priests answered from suspended pulpits, spitting scrap code that flayed machine spirits and turned servo arms against their masters. Skitarii collapsed as their own augmetics rebelled, legs locking, lungs flooding with coolant, optics burning out from within. One Magos remained upright even as half his body tried to obey enemy code. He severed his own mechadendrites with a cutting torch and continued the rite through a mouth filled with blood and static. The Blackstone hated them all. It sent waves of pressure through the sanctum. Adepts bled from auditory implants. Demons fused into cable nests, shrieked as pure machine logic scraped against warp corruption. The regulator spine pulsed, unstable, and the will of eternity shuddered from prow to hidden heart. Morkath's voice broke over Abaddon's vox. "Warmaster, intrusion at the secondary plasma regulators. Control ghosts multiplying. They are not seeking occupation. They are severing obedience. I know what they are doing. Fortress response is unpredictable. Then make it predictable. My body is not enough for full communion under this stress." Abaddon crushed a charging wolf beneath the talon, forcing the warrior down until his helm split against the deck and the skull inside followed. "Become enough." Morkath's channel filled with static, then a sound that might have been pain and might have been obedience. Abaddon advanced into a wider chamber where gravity had failed entirely. Bodies, wreckage, bolter casings, and droplets of blood drifted around Blackstone pillars carved with impossible geometries. The battle continued in 3 dimensions. Space wolves kicked from pillar to wall, mag boots flaring. Black Legion terminators anchored themselves and fired with grim precision. A chain axe spun loose through the air, striking a Skitarius and opening him from groin to throat. His fluids spread in a red cloud that a passing bolt shell ignited into steaming mist. At the far side of the chamber, a knot of boarders fought toward a control arch. Abaddon saw their purpose at once. Not the arch itself, the conduits beneath it, a severing point, a place where the fortress's next planetary strike could be delayed, misaligned, or made to burn itself hollow. He went through them. A Mechanicum Praetorian turned, heavy weapon rising. The Talon fired first. Integrated bolters hammered the machine warrior, shells detonating across chest plating, shoulder mounts, exposed organs, and blessed augmetics. The Praetorian fell backward in pieces. A space wolf lunged through the smoke with a frost blade aimed at Abaddon's throat. Drachnian met it. The frost blade screamed as the demon weapon bit into it, and Abaddon's backhand with the talons struck the loyalist's helm hard enough to pulp the head inside without fully breaking the faceplate. Another wolf leapt onto his back, combat blade punching for the soft seals beneath his gorget. Abaddon reached over his shoulder, seized the warrior by the pack harness, and hurled him into a Blackstone pillar. The impact broke the Astartes in a way even transhuman bones could not endure. He rebounded bonelessly, armor cracked, limbs hanging wrong. Still, the loyalist tried to crawl. Abaddon stepped on him and continued. Around the control arch, the surviving Mechanicum adepts completed part of their rite. The fortress convulsed. Lights died. Gravity returned all at once, and with vicious force. Bodies slammed into the deck. Several broke apart on impact. A Black Legion Terminator crashed down hard enough to dent the floor, rose with one leg dragging, and kept firing. The control arch split from top to base, bleeding black light. Somewhere deep within the will of eternity, a regulator failed. Then the void outside turned white. The phalanx had arrived. Its presence hit the battle before any report could name it. Auspex systems howled. Vox channels flattened beneath command alarms. The will of eternity's wounded shields flared, overstrained and misaligned. Through ruptured vision feeds and external picked captures, Abaddon saw the impossible golden mass of the Imperial Fist's ancient fortress vessel translating into the war zone, a relic of Terra's own defiance brought to Cadia's dying hour. Its guns spoke. The first salvo struck the will of eternity across its damaged flank. Not a raid strike, not harassment fire, catastrophic, disciplined, murderous bombardment from a fortress ship built to make void war feel like siegecraft. Lance beams tore across Blackstone armor. Macro shells hammered through corrupted grafts and dark mechanicum superstructure. Shield layers failed in sequence, each collapse sending backlash through the interior like the death of a starship's nervous system. The chamber around Abaddon split. A Blackstone pillar cracked and unfolded into shards that cut through power armor and flesh alike. The deck buckled. A chosen warrior vanished into a widening seam, his vox cutting off mid-oath. Fire vented sideways from a conduit, burning without oxygen, blue and black and hungry. The dead rose briefly in zero gravity as atmosphere screamed from the chamber through fractures opening to the void. Warmaster, Siren's voice came through broken static. The phalanx is engaging, fortress integrity failing across multiple sectors, primary weapon alignment lost. Morkath's voice followed, ragged with distortion. I can preserve partial function. Not here. Not from these sections. Withdrawal required. Immediate withdrawal required. Abaddon stood amid the collapse, Drachnian in hand, the talon dripping blood that steamed in the sudden cold. A space wolf, pinned beneath fallen Blackstone, raised a bolt pistol at him. Abaddon looked down. The shot fired. It struck his breastplate and burst, cracking an old scar in the armor, but not piercing it. The Warmaster stared at the loyalist. Then the ceiling came down between them and ended the matter. For a moment, he considered remaining. The thought was not courage, it was temptation. To stand in the heart of the wounded fortress and dare the phalanx to kill him. To carve through loyalists until the Blackstone roof fell and buried them all. To answer insult with presence. He crushed the impulse. Dying inside a crippled weapon would be indulgence. Victory required will, not pride. Withdraw marked cohorts, he voxed. Abandon compromised corridors. Seal breaches behind us. Morkath will preserve what can be preserved. And the borders? A Terminator captain asked. Let the fortress eat those we do not kill. Teleport runes flared. Black. Legion survivors vanished in storms of black lightning, dragging wounded officers and key warpsmiths with them. Other squads remained by order, holding doors they would never leave, buying time with bolter fire and chainfist work while the corridors collapsed around them. Abaddon translated back to the vengeful spirit as the will of eternity burned. The strategium reformed around him. Sirens wailed. The hololith of the Blackstone fortress flickered with wounds, entire sections gone dark, weapon lines severed, power flow crippled. Around Cadia, the orbital war raged harder than before. The phalanx burned bright among Imperial icons, hateful and magnificent. Below, Casa Craft still endured. The pylon zone still resisted. Cadia, for the moment, had been spared the fortress's full wrath. No one spoke. Abaddon stood before the hololith, silent. The talon of Horus opened and closed once. Blood from the boarding action dripped from its claws onto the strategium deck. He did not rage. He did not curse. He did not invoke the gods or promise vengeance to the air. His silence frightened the chamber more than fury ever could. On the display, the will of eternity listed in orbit like a wounded moon, vast and bleeding, its execution stroke denied. Cadia still lived, for now. The first report reached Abaddon as a failure of prediction, not defeat, not yet. Defeat was a word lesser beings used when the field no longer resembled their expectations. Abaddon did not worship expectation. He used it, then discarded it when it became weak. But the data streaming through the strategium of the vengeful spirit had begun to show patterns no sane Imperial commander would have permitted, and that made the warmaster look closer. Cadia was dying by degrees. Its fortress lines were gutted. Its trenches overflowed. Casa Craft burned in layered rings of black smoke and emergency lumen. The sky above the world was a furnace of falling wreckage, lance fire, flak bursts, and the corpse trails of ships dying in orbit. Yet within the ruin, impossible forces converged. Not simply reinforcements, convergence. A living saint moved through the ash. An inquisitor carried suspicion like a blade. A priest of Mars, whose body was a crawling armory of forbidden mechanisms, forced his way toward the ancient Blackstone fields. A Xenos lord older than human empires walked among them, not as prisoner, not as prey, but as ally of convenience. Custodians, golden and few, cut through demon filth with the cold perfection of Terra's own wrath. Surviving Astartes formed hard points in the retreating battle lines. Cadian command remnants moved around them, battered but still functional, still issuing orders, still refusing to become panic. Abaddon watched their icons draw together around the pylon approaches. The sight was grotesque, not because of the alien, not because of the saint, not because of the machine priest or the inquisitor or the loyalist demigods in gold. The galaxy had always been grotesque. What offended him was the flexibility of it. The Imperium was strongest when it forgot its own chains, its laws, its dogmas, its priesthoods, its hatred of the alien, its fear of invention, its suspicion of miracles it did not own. All of these had calcified mankind into a corpse empire. But now, under the pressure of extinction, some instinct deeper than doctrine had forced unlike things together. Desperation had made them useful. That was dangerous. "Confirm the Xenos' presence," Abaddon said. Cacadia's siren stood beneath a cascade of fractured intelligence streams. His face was underlit by crimson hololithic glow, his eyes moving across casualty reports, picked captures, Vox intercepts, and augur ghosts. Confirmed. Necron signature, not dynastic invasion profile, singular command presence, identifiers align with archived references to Trazyn the Infinite. Several Black Legion captains shifted at the name, not fear, recognition. The long war had taught them that ancient enemies wore many faces, and not all of them served the gods. Abaddon's gaze narrowed. Trazyn, collector, thief of ages, grave robber with an empire's memory sealed in pocket dimensions. Not a savior, never that. The alien had not come for love of Cadia, nor pity for mankind, nor hatred of chaos in the crude moral manner of Imperial sermons. He had come because the galaxy was his museum, and a galaxy drowned in the warp would ruin the collection. There was honesty in that. Abaddon preferred it to faith. And the machine priest? Belisarius Cowl, Siren said. Archmagos Dominus. Extreme augmentation. Multiple weapon systems. New spheric command reach significant. Knowledge base inconsistent with approved Martian restriction. Meaning? Heretic by Imperial law. Asset by Imperial desperation. Abaddon looked at the cluster of Mechanicus signals moving through the broken approaches, protected by Skitarii screens, Astartes remnants, and Cadian hardpoints. Carl's icon did not move like a man. It moved like a crawling arsenal. Servo limbs, integrated weapons, data spines, sensor arrays. Old knowledge folded into a body that had replaced humility with machinery and called the result service. Mars had always bred hypocrites. They chained innovation and worshipped engines they did not understand. But when the abyss opened, they reached for forbidden things with both hands. Carl was dangerous because he was arrogant enough to gamble with half-understood Blackstone and intelligent enough that the gamble might succeed. The Saint, Abaddon said. Siren hesitated only long enough to confirm the stream. Celestine, multiple battlefield sightings, verified resurrection mythology, impact on morale severe. Units routed in prior sectors have counterattacked after visual contact. Vox traffic indicates renewed religious fervor. On the hololith, the Saint was not represented as a body, but as a distortion in Imperial behavior. Lines that should have collapsed hardened. Regiments marked broken reformed under fire. Priests who should have died screaming instead led charges. Wounded men rose from cover and fired into advancing demon packs, as if death had become a debt they were eager to pay. Abaddon had seen many miracles. Most were lies. Some were weapons. Celestine was a symbol given a blade and wings of fire. That made her useful to the Imperium, and therefore necessary to break. She did not need to kill many of his warriors to matter. She needed only to convince the dying that faith could hold back extinction for another breath. In war, another breath could be a reinforced line, a completed ritual, a pylon activated. Inquisitor Greyfax remains with them, Siren added. She disputes the Xenos presence. Vox fragments indicate hostility toward the alien and caution toward the Saint. Yet she has not killed either. No. Then she is less stupid than her office requires. Greyfax's icon moved near the convergence, never central, never trusting, always watching. Suspicion, given human form. The Inquisition bred such creatures by the thousand, but most mistook paranoia for intelligence. Greyfax, it seemed, understood priority. She feared the alien. She doubted the miracle. She mistrusted the machine priest. Yet she had not wasted the moment tearing apart the only alliance that could still deny Abaddon his cleanest victory. Cadia had produced stubborn soldiers. The Imperium, cornered, had produced an impossible alliance. Kill them, Abaddon said. The order did not need embellishment. Black Legion kill teams moved at once. Not the loud packs, not the glory-hungry, not those whose armor was bright with devotional filth or whose minds had been hollowed by gods. Chosen in black plate, silent beneath oath runes, their bolters loaded with specialist ammunition, and their blades blessed by no priest, but tested on loyalist bone. Teleport locks were calculated through interference. Assassin cults bound to the Legion received target names through encrypted Vox. Demon packs were unleashed along the flanking routes, not to slaughter widely, but to force the convergence inward, to pressure its movement, to make its defenders spend attention and ammunition. At the same time, Abaddon tightened the fist around Creed. The Cadian commander's remaining command structure had been difficult to isolate. Creed did not move like a hero seeking martyrdom. He moved like a fortress mind, trapped inside a mortal body, using every reserve, every dead end, every collapsing route, every field gun, every scrap of delay. Abaddon respected the function, not the man. A commander was an organ. Remove the organ, and the body weakened. "Pressure Kasser-Craft's eastern underways," he ordered. "Drive armor into the central reserves. Force Creed to choose between the pylon approaches and his evacuation arteries." Siren relayed the order. On Cadia, the next wave began. Black Legion Chosen struck first through a half-collapsed transit shrine, appearing in flashes of teleport lightning amid Cadian rear echelons. Their combi bolters tore apart Vox crews before the first alarm finished sounding. A Cadian officer drew a chainsword and charged them with a pistol in his other hand. He died under 3 bolt impacts, his torso bursting open across a map table. His adjutant seized the handset as blood sprayed over the grid and finished sending the warning before a chain blade took off his arm at the shoulder. A demon pack ran into the Skitarii flank, protecting Carl's advance. The demons came low and fast, all wet teeth, horn and claw, their forms blurring in the pylon thin air. The Blackstone fields were not yet fully awake, but even dormant they made the creatures wrong in their own skins. They flickered as they moved, becoming skeletal, then swollen, then burning shadows. Skitarii rad carbines and galvanic rifles fired in disciplined bursts. Several demons came apart into black smoke and boiling ichor. Others reached the line, and the fighting became butchery among red robes and iron limbs. Carl did not stop. He moved through the storm like a walking forged shrine dragged by its own ambition. Servo limbs lashed and fired. Mechadendrites interfaced with broken relay stones. Weapon arms spat plasma, volkite heat, and streams of data that made nearby machine spirits shriek awake. He spoke in bursts of Binharik too fast for unaugmented minds, commanding repairs, scans, calculations, and blasphemously improvised rites. Every step brought him closer to the pylons. Every second he lived offended Abaddon's design. The first assassin reached him through smoke and died without touching him. A servo limb snapped out, too fast for mortal sight, and crushed the attacker's skull into the shape of a broken cup. The second fired from a ruined habstack. The shot struck a refractor field and became light. The third was intercepted by a custodian. Abaddon watched the Golden Warrior kill with mechanical grace. The custodian did not rage. He did not posture. He did not waste movement on hatred. His guardian spear moved once, twice, and the assassin came apart in sections, armor opened, heart pierced, skull split. It was the kind of perfection Abaddon had always despised in the Emperor's handmade sentinels. Not because it was weak, because it was proof of resources spent on ornament, while the legions had bled to build an empire. "Redirect Terminator Claw, Harrick," Abaddon said. "Break the golden ones if they expose themselves." The Vox clicked acknowledgement. Then the battlefield changed. Trazyn opened his collection. It began as green light in the ash. At first, Abaddon believed it a Necron reinforcement translation. Then the shapes emerged, and even the Black Legion captains nearest the hololith fell silent. Warriors stepped out of nothing. Not one army, not one era. Pieces of history torn from their proper graves and thrown onto Cadia's last battlefield. Men in obsolete Imperial panoply, blinking as if a heartbeat ago they had stood under different skies. Power-armored figures in ancient marks, their livery scarred by wars the Imperium had buried beneath 10,000 years of lies. Guardsmen from dead regiments raised laser guns in confusion, and then, seeing traitors before them and Aquilus among the defenders, began to fire. Tech relics crawled from dimensional prisons. Xenos constructs unfolded beside humans who would have killed them under any other sky. Trazyn spent lives that were not his, as casually as Abaddon spent cultists, but he spent them with a curator's precision. The effect was immediate disorder. A Black Legion assault line expecting exhausted Cadians instead met warriors stolen from forgotten battlefields, some still shouting orders from campaigns long ended. An Iron Warriors gun team was overrun by troops who had no right to exist in that place, their uniforms archaic, their fear fresh, their volleys real. A pack of demonkin charged a cluster of newly released warriors and cut them apart, only to be struck from the flank by relic armor that should have been dust in a museum vault. Trazyn had forced Abaddon's armies to fight the past itself. The warmaster's expression did not change. "Wasteful," one captain muttered. Abaddon turned his eyes toward him. The captain lowered his head. "No," Abaddon said. "Effective. The alien had not unleashed them from sentiment. He had used confusion as a weapon, morale as a contagion, history as ammunition. Men who believed themselves saved by ancient heroes fought harder. Men who saw impossible allies beside them forgot, for precious seconds, that the world was dying. Even the contradiction of Xenos aid could be drowned beneath the immediate need to survive. Greyfax's icon remained near Trazyn, but angled away, as if even in the middle of apocalypse she kept a weapon ready for him. That, too, was efficient. Hatred postponed was not hatred abandoned. Celestine struck next. She descended into a broken avenue near the pylon approach, wings of fire cutting through smoke thick enough to choke engines. Demons recoiled from her light. Not all, not the greatest, not those anchored deeply into flesh and sacrifice, but enough. Lesser things shrieked and clawed at their own eyes. Cultists turned weapons upon themselves rather than look at her. Cadian soldiers who had been falling back stopped, rallied, and fired past her into the oncoming dark. A word-bearer, dark apostle, tried to meet her with scripture. His Crozius blazed. His mouth opened wide around blasphemies that had damned worlds. Celestine cut him down in front of his congregation. His followers screamed, some in grief, some in revelation, some because the pylon shadow behind the saint was beginning to strengthen, and the gods suddenly felt farther away. Abaddon leaned forward. There it was, not victory, not yet, awakening. The pylon field trembled through the hololith as black absence deepened around the ancient structures. Carl's data rights crawled across the command display like silver insects. Trazyn's alien signal pulsed in answer, cold and geometrically perfect. The Mechanicus and the Necron, mankind's machine hunger and Xenos eternity, were forcing comprehension upon a system neither truly owned. The air in the strategium changed. Drachnian whispered at Abaddon's side, not with hunger now, but irritation. Across the fleet, astropaths convulsed. Bound demons in engine cores hammered against their wards. Possessed warriors in the surface assault stumbled. Word-bearers shrieked warnings over corrupted Vox. Sorcerers reported instability. Runes of demonic strength dimmed around the pylon approaches. On Cadia, the first lesser demons began to recoil. Their forms thinned. Claws became smoke. Horns cracked into ash. Warp fire guttered as if starved of air. The Blackstone did not blaze. It did not roar. It did not pray. It simply became more real than the horrors standing before it. Reality hardened. Abaddon watched the demons of his host shrink back from the awakening pylons, and at last, the impossible alliance showed him the shape of its threat. Cadia was not merely trying to survive. Cadia was trying to close the door. The pylons awakened without thunder. That was what made them terrible. No hymn rolled across Cadia. No golden light burst from the heavens. No righteous flame descended to cleanse the smoke-black fields. The ancient Blackstone did not shout its dominion over the warp. It did not need to. It simply remembered what it was, and the galaxy around it began to obey. Across the broken pylon fields, darkness sharpened. The monoliths rose through ash and bombardment haze like the bones of a dead god, their surfaces drinking firelight and reflecting nothing. Some had been cracked by artillery. Some were half buried in rubble and corpses. Others stood untouched, while armies killed each other at their bases, indifferent to blood, prayer, treachery, and command. Silver lines of activation crawled over their black faces, not glowing so much as cutting absence into the air. The warp storm above Cadia recoiled. Abaddon saw it from the surface and from orbit at once. His command feeds fractured under the pressure of impossible contradiction. but the truth could not be mistaken. The Empyrean boil that had swollen across the sky began to thin. The clouds of unreality pulled back, as if something vast had laid cold hands against them. Demonic auroras guttered. Warp lightning died in broken spasms. The eyes reflected madness, which had hung over Cadia like a predator's mouth, clenched and shuddered. Reality hardened. Demons began to vanish. It happened first among the lesser packs clawing at the pylon approaches. Their limbs stretched, blurred, and came apart in ribbons of smoke. Horns cracked, talons softened into ash. Tongues that had once spoken blasphemies in the ears of dying men became steam in the cold, null light. They did not die like flesh. They were denied, unmade by the sudden refusal of the world to permit them. They screamed as they went. The sound passed through every vox channel, every demon engine, every bound ritual circle and possessed throat in the war zone. It was rage. It was fear. It was starvation. It was the howl of things that had believed themselves eternal, discovering, for one bright and hateful moment, that eternity could be barred. Possessed warriors collapsed where they stood. A word-bearer champion near the western approach dropped his crozius and tore at his own breastplate, fingers clawing through scripture, armor, skin, and the mouths screaming from his ribs. The entities within him had no room to breathe. They hammered against his flesh for release and found no purchase. His body ruptured in a wet blossom of muscle, bone, and black vapor, leaving his armor kneeling empty in the mud. Cultists stopped singing. That silence spread faster than plague. Men and mutants who had marched beneath icons of the dark gods suddenly felt the sky become empty above them. The whispers that had promised them glory withdrew. The heat behind their eyes cooled. The voices in their blood became distant, then faint, then gone. Some fell to their knees and begged. Some went mad from the absence, screaming not because God spoke to them, but because they no longer did. Others simply stood still, rifles slack in their hands, while Cadian lasfire cut them down in disciplined ranks. The word-bearers lost control of their rights. Around a damaged pylon spur, dark apostles shrieked scripture until blood poured from their mouths. Their acolytes hammered nails of blessed brass into the stone. The Blackstone rejected them. The nails bent. The blood steamed away. Possessed cultists chained around the ritual circle convulsed, ignited from within, and burned without flame, their skeletons visible through blackening flesh before they collapsed into greasy ash. A demon host burst its restraints, not to attack, but to flee. It made 3 steps before the null field caught it fully, and then there was only a human corpse falling face first into dust. Abaddon watched the disaster unfold and understood its value. This was the revelation. Not the saint, not the Xenos, not the machine priest, not Creed's stubbornness, nor Kel's loyalty, nor the endless ranks of Cadian dead refusing to make enough room for his armies to pass. The pylons were the truth. Cadia had never been merely a fortress world. It had never been only guns, chasers, trenches, and soldiers raised beneath the eye. It was a lock built into reality, a mechanism of Blackstone and forgotten purpose, standing at the throat of the immaterium, strengthening the skin of the material universe against the clawing hunger beyond it. The Imperium had wrapped it in regiments and walls, but the walls had only guarded the mechanism. The men had only protected the prison door. And now Abaddon saw the greater shape. If Cadia could be chained by Blackstone, so could the galaxy. If the eye could be held at bay by ancient stone and buried harmonics, then the long war had not been fought merely against men. It had been fought against architecture, against physics, against the dead hands of civilizations that had known the warp before mankind learned to burn witches and call it faith. For one moment, hatred and fascination were the same thing inside him. Then he acted. Demon contingents withdraw from the inner approaches, he voxed, They are useless there. Send iron, send flesh, send the legion. His commanders obeyed. Those who hesitated died, not always by his hand, but by the command structure his will had built. The Black Legion did not need demons to kill. It had slaughtered beneath stars that had never heard the names of gods. It had broken worlds with bolter, blade, artillery, and patience. It had survived the Eye because it was more than worship, more than hunger, more than madness. Terminators advanced where demons could not endure. They came through the oppressive null light in black and gold, their armor scarred by 10,000 years of war, their combi bolters firing measured bursts. Chosen followed in disciplined formations, moving from ruin to ruin, executing Cadian weapon crews, clearing bunkers, with grenades and chain blades, marking pylon-side routes for armor. Traitor artillery shifted fire to mortal gunnery protocols when sorcerous auguries failed. Predators and land raiders ground forward beneath Lascanon fire, their machine spirits snarling under dark mechanicum goads. Heretic Astartes advanced through the silence left by banished demons and filled it with bolter thunder. The battle narrowed. No longer did it sprawl as a planetary assault across endless fronts. Everything drew inward toward the catacombs, the pylon approaches, the shattered plazas, the half-collapsed underways beneath Casa Kraf, and the ancient Blackstone fields beyond. Cadia's last strength bled into the same wound. Kasrkin fought from buried passages with hotshot laser guns and melter charges. Cadian shock troops formed firing lines behind barricades made from broken statuary, tank wreckage, and bodies frozen stiff by ash. Sororitas survivors sang war hymns through cracked helms, their voices hoarse, bolters kicking in armored hands as the null light made even their faith feel heavy. Astartes loyalists held junctions that should have fallen hours earlier. Skitari maniples dragged cables and data spikes toward Karl's work, while their bodies failed under fire. The null light pressed on everything. It made colors dull. It made flames burn smaller. It made vox signals flatten and psychic senses recoil. It made miracles flicker. Saint Celestine stood in it and dimmed. Abaddon saw her through smoke and ruin as he descended into the pylon approach, not by hololith now, not by distant command, but with his own eyes. He had come because the siege had become something purer than strategy. This was no longer merely a matter of walls or casualties. It was a duel between his long war and Cadia's reason for existing. His teleport flare had killed the nearest mortals when he arrived. The pressure of his translation burst lungs, cracked skulls, and threw men from their feet. His Justerin landed around him like black judgment. The talon of Horus opened, claws wet with old murder. Drachnian whispered at his side, furious at the Blackstone silence gnawing at its edge. Abaddon advanced. A squad of Kasrkin met him in a ruined transit nave. Their officer did not order retreat. He knew better than to waste breath. Hotshot beams snapped against Abaddon's armor, scoring black plate, burning through trophy parchment, glancing from the talon. A melter gun fired from his left. The beam struck his pauldron and slagged a ridge of ancient ceramite, heat washing across his helm lenses. He answered with the talon's bolters. The melter gunner came apart from chest to spine. The others died in seconds, not because they lacked courage, but because courage could not stop claws forged for demigods. He stepped over them. A sororitas warrior fired from the steps of a shattered shrine. Her bolt shells detonated against his breastplate and thigh. She was chanting something he did not care to hear. Drachnian cut through her weapon, her armor, and the stone behind her. The shrine wall drank the spray. A loyalist Astartes came next. Blue armor cracked and blackened, power sword raised. Their blades met with a shriek that made nearby Cadians clutch at their ears. The loyalist held for 3 blows. On the 4th, Abaddon broke his guard. On the 5th, the talon punched through his torso and lifted him from the ground. The warrior tried to spit a curse. Blood filled his helm grill instead. Abaddon threw him into a knot of defenders and kept walking. The saint came through the smoke. Her wings still burned, but not as they had before. The pylons pulled at her radiance, reducing it from blazing dawn to guttering gold. Even diminished, she changed the battlefield around her. Men who had been crawling rose to fire. Wounded soldiers dragged themselves against broken walls to clear firing lanes. Priests lifted icons with severed hands. The dying looked at her and believed their deaths had weight. That was why Abaddon hated her, not because she was powerful. Power could be measured, countered, broken. He hated what she did to weakness. She gave it shape. She turned despair into defiance. She made mortals spend their last heartbeats as if they were coins that could purchase victory. She came at him with a blade of light. Drachnian met it in darkness. The clash burst outward in a shock of gold and black. The null field swallowed much of it, muting what should have become a storm. Celestine moved fast, too fast for any mortal eye, her sword striking in arcs that would have opened a battle tank. Abaddon turned each blow with brutal economy. He did not dance. He did not posture. He endured, pressed, punished. The talons snapped for her wings and tore fire from them like feathers. Drachnian cut across her guard and drew blood bright enough to glow before the pylons dimmed it. She struck him. Her blade pierced a seam in his armor below the ribs, burning through ceramite and into transhuman flesh. Pain flared, hot and clean, almost surprising beneath the deadening null light. The Justerians surged forward. Abaddon snarled them back with a wordless vox burst. His. He caught Celestine with the talon on her next pass. Not fully. Enough. Claws scored her armor and hurled her through the broken arch of a shrine gate. Stone collapsed around her. Cadians shouted. Some in horror, some in rage. Good. Let them watch symbols bleed. Beyond her, through smoke and pylon shadow, Creed still commanded. The mortal heart of Cadia stood amid collapsing order, coat torn, face grey with dust and exhaustion, eyes hard beneath the weight of a world's ending. Ursarkar Creed did not look like a myth. He looked like a soldier who had not slept, a commander buried beneath impossible arithmetic and still refusing to miscount. Vox officers died near him. Kell remained at his side, banner and blade and body interposed between command and annihilation. Kell's refusal was as plain as armor. He would not abandon Creed, not while breath remained, not while Cadia could still buy another minute. Creed knew what the defense had become. Abaddon could see it in the way the Cadian commander shifted reserves, in the orders he gave and the routes he left open. Survival was no longer planetary victory. Cadia's continued existence might now be measured in evacuation corridors, in seconds bought for transports, in records carried off-world, in soldiers saved to keep the name alive. Creed was no fool. He understood that holding Cadia might mean preserving enough of Cadia to matter after the stones cracked. That made him more dangerous than zealots. "Kill the banner-bearer," Abaddon ordered. His chosen moved. Cadians died to stop them. They threw themselves into firing lanes. They detonated charges in corridors they still occupied. A wounded officer with one leg gone dragged himself onto a grenade bundle beneath a Terminator's stride. The blast toppled the giant and bought Kell 3 more breaths. 3 breaths mattered. The pylons strengthened. The null light deepened until even Abaddon felt it press against the demon blade in his hand. Drachnian hissed inside his thoughts, its voice thinning, sharpening, enraged by the taste of a universe refusing murder. Across the approach, possessed warriors collapsed in earnest now, not merely weakened, but emptied. Sorcerers staggered, their wards unraveling. Demon engines faltered, as the things bound within them lost purchase on metal. Vox channels filled with reports of instability, retreat, banishment, silence. If he remained too long, he could be stranded within a field, built to deny the very powers his armies had harnessed. If he pressed forward, he could reach Creed. He chose to press. Abaddon drove through the last defenders, between himself and the Cadian command knot. The talon pulped a Kasrkin against a barricade. Drachnian opened 2 soldiers in one cut. Ascitarius fired until the talon crushed his head and torso into sparking ruin. Kell turned toward him, defiant beneath the banner of a world already dying by inches. Then Celestine rose from the rubble behind him, diminished, bloodied, still burning. Her blade struck from his flank, biting into damaged armor, finding the wound she had opened. Pain burst through Abaddon's side. The null field made it strangely pure, stripped of demonic haze, a reminder that even the warmaster's flesh could be cut. His counterblow hurled her back, but the moment had passed. The pylons surged. The air became iron. The warp recoiled so violently that every demon thing in the approach screamed at once. Several vanished outright. Others were dragged backward by forces no claw could resist. Black Legion warriors held, but the demonic elements of his assault collapsed around them. The path to Creed remained open for only a heartbeat more, then Cadian fire, loyalist. Bodies and pylon pressure closed it like a wound clotting. Teleport warnings blazed inside Abaddon's helm display. Delay risked failure. Failure risked isolation. Isolation risked not death, but waste. He would not be wasted. Withdraw, he voxed. The word cut through his commanders like a blade. Black lightning took him as Cadia's guns hammered the space where he had stood. He reformed aboard the vengeful spirit, with blood running beneath his armor and smoke curling from the wound in his side. The strategium turned toward him in silence. No one spoke of retreat. No one dared. Abaddon stood before the hololith of Cadia and began to laugh. It was not the laughter of victory. Not yet. It was colder than triumph and worse than rage. The Imperials had shown him the truth. The pylons could not merely be bypassed. They could not be ignored, bargained with, corrupted quickly enough, or drowned beneath fear. They were Cadia's heart, and Cadia's heart was a lock forged into reality. If the pylons could not be conquered, then Cadia itself had to die. The world below still burned. Abaddon's laughter faded. "Prepare the will of eternity," he said. The chirurgeons worked in silence because Abaddon had ordered silence, and silence aboard the vengeful spirit was a form of terror. They stood around him in the apothecarian strategium, a chamber that had been repurposed from healing into violation. Surgical arms hung from the ceiling like steel insects. Brass lamps burned with green witchlight. The air stank of cauterized flesh, old blood, embalming oils, sanctified poisons, and the coppery bitterness of exposed transhuman organs. The deck beneath the Warmaster's throne was engraved with the eye, its grooves darkened by the runoff of centuries. Serfs knelt in the corners with their faces to the floor, holding trays of hooks, saws, flesh clamps, injector rigs, and vials of clotting agents thick enough to crawl inside the glass. Abaddon sat without restraint. His armor had been opened by degrees rather than removed. No one aboard the vengeful spirit would have dared strip the Warmaster from his plate unless he had commanded it himself, and no wound sustained on Cadia justified such indignity. Sections of his warplate had been unlocked, lifted, and held apart by suspensor clamps. Beneath them, his flesh was a geography of old scars and fresh ruin. Celestine's blade had found a seam below the ribs, burning through ceramite, fiber bundle muscle, reinforced tissue, and into the living darkness beneath. The wound had bled despite his physiology. It had smoked despite the extinguishing pressure of the pylons. It had hurt. That fact interested him more than the wound itself. A chirurgeon inserted a hooked spreader into the cut and opened it wider to reach the deeper damage. Another pressed a cautery brand into the flesh, sealing vessels that would have killed a lesser being in moments. The smell of his own burning meat filled the chamber. Abaddon did not move. He refused the pain suppressors offered in ritual silence. He refused the narcotic fog. He refused the neural clamps. Pain was information, and he had never trusted servants who tried to keep information from him. Around the apothecarian strategium,
Casualty reports continued to fall like music, not soft music, not beauty. The music of war was iron striking bone, command channels failing, ships dying, ammunition tallies emptying, regiments vanishing from the field, and the last words of commanders who realized too late that the shape of the battle had changed around them. Vox streams hissed from suspended speakers, hololithic runes flickered across the air, Black Legion officers delivered lost figures without flourish. The demonic contingents had suffered catastrophic instability around the pylon zones. Word-bearer rights had collapsed in several sectors. Possessed formations had become liabilities. Cult armies were fragmenting under silence from the gods. Surface armor continued to advance in places, but the null fields were growing stronger. Abaddon listened while his wound was stapled shut with black metal. A lesser warlord would have raged at injury. A lesser warlord would have demanded revenge against the saint, against Creed, against the alien thief, against the machine priest with his crawling knowledge. Abaddon let the chirurgeons work and listened to the rhythm of failure transforming into clarity. Zaraphiston entered.
Without ceremony, the seer's robes trailed across the deck, their hems stiff with ash and dried blood. His blind eyes were open, filmed white, fixed on sights that had nothing to do with the room. Warp light crawled beneath his skin in sickly pulses, but each pulse was weaker than before, as though the awakening pylons pressed even through distance and steel. "My lord," Zaraphiston said. Abaddon did not look at him. "Speak." "The pylons are stabilizing." The nearest chirurgeon paused for less than a heartbeat, then continued threading a fiber bundle replacement through the warmaster's damaged side. Zaraphiston's voice lowered. "The null field strengthens in waves. The demonic hosts nearest the array are collapsing. Lesser entities have been banished outright. Bound things within engines grow unstable. Sorcerous auguries fail within the inner approaches. The word-bearers cannot hold their rights. The gods' voices diminish where the Blackstone wakes. The gods are not my generals. No, Warmaster, but much of the host still believes otherwise." Abaddon's lips did not move. "Then much of the host may learn." Zaraphiston inclined his head. The gesture was both submission and warning. "The will of eternity remains damaged. Its primary weapon cannot be brought to full alignment before the pylon field further degrades warp reactive systems. Morkath reports partial restoration, but the fortress is wounded. If you attempt conventional conquest, Cadia may endure long enough for evacuation to widen, for the pylon harmonics to reach full coherence, and for our demonic elements to become dead weight." Abaddon let the silence breathe. The chirurgeon sealed a deeper layer of tissue. The metal staple gun clicked again and again, each sound precise. Outside the chamber, the vengeful spirit shuddered as its guns fired into the void. Cadia still burned beneath them. Cadia still lived. "May fail," Abaddon said at last. Zaraphiston's throat moved. "Yes." The word would have killed many men. Zaraphiston survived it because he had not softened it. A new voice entered the chamber through the vox, doubled by a subsonic harmonic that made the surgical lamps tremble. "Warmaster?" Dravura Morkath. Her transmission came from the will of eternity, though much of the fortress's command spine had been shattered by the phalanx and the borders. Her voice was strained, not from fear, but from being stretched across too many dying systems. Beneath her human speech lay the Blackstone undertone, wounded and furious. "Report," Abaddon said. "The fortress endures. Primary discharge alignment is compromised. Regulator spines have suffered severe damage. Several engine vaults are venting into void. Dark Mechanicum choirs have lost cohesion in the Eastern Command lattice. I have restored partial obedience through manual communion and remaining slave spines. Can it fire? Not as before. Can it move?" A pause. "Yes." The single word carried more possibility than all the casualty reports. Morkath continued, speaking faster now, not desperately, but with the urgency of an engineer trying to preserve the priceless from the wasteful. With time, I can recover additional function. The fortress can be withdrawn from immediate engagement, stabilized behind the fleet, and restored to strategic value. Its weapon may yet be useful in later prosecution of the war, against Bellis Corona, against Agrippina, against Terra itself, if the gods and Blackstone permit. The will of eternity is damaged, but not spent. Abaddon looked at the hololithic projection of Cadia. The world turned beneath him, wrapped in fire, shields, smoke, and the stubborn pulse of resistance. Around the pylon zones, blackness deepened. It was not the blackness of night or void. It was the blackness of denial, the absence where demons could not breathe, the hardening of reality against the eye. The will of eternity was priceless. He knew that better than any of them. It was older than the Imperium, older than the lies of the ecclesiarchy, older than the pathetic little banners raised by men who thought 10,000 years was history rather than a pause between wounds. It was a captured god engine, a Blackstone fortress twisted into service, a weapon that could have burned fleets, split bastions, and perhaps one day cast its shadow across Terra's throne-lit skies. Priceless. Cadia's death was worth more. That was the arithmetic of the long war. Not hunger, not revenge, not pride disguised as destiny. Arithmetic. A commander who could not sacrifice the irreplaceable would never break an empire built to spend the infinite. The Imperium killed worlds by neglect, by tithe, by ignorance, by law. Abaddon would kill this one by choice. The distinction mattered. "Morcath," he said, and his voice was almost gentle. "My lord, you have served well." Another pause. This one carried understanding at its edges. "The fortress can be preserved," she said. "Yes." "It can be restored." "Yes." "It can still be made a weapon for the road to Terra." "Yes." The chirurgeons withdrew from Abaddon's side. The wound was sealed, layered with synthetic muscle fiber, black staples, clotting resin, and plates of temporary armor graft. He rose before the final clamp had fully disengaged. One serf whimpered when the warmaster's shadow fell across him. A Justaerin guard killed the serf with a backhanded blow that broke his neck and left him twitching beside the surgical tray. Abaddon stepped toward the hololith. Cadia turned. Morcath's voice came again, quieter. "Is this sacrifice necessary?" Abaddon rested the talon of Horus on the edge of the projection table. The claws sank into the metal with a soft shriek. Necessity is a word for men without will. No one in the chamber breathed loudly enough to be heard. He continued, calm as a death sentence written in stone. "We do not need to occupy Cadia. We do not need to kill every defender. We do not need to hold the Khazars, silence every gun, or claim every trench. We do not need their surrender. We need the pylons broken beyond recall." Zaraphiston bowed his head, not in approval, but in recognition of the future bending. Morcath's harmonic undertone deepened. "The descent vector will destroy the fortress." "Yes." "It will kill all remaining personnel aboard who cannot be withdrawn." "Yes." "It will annihilate our surface forces in the impact theater. Hounds, cult hosts, armor, demon engines, word-bearer ritual cadres, Iron Warriors siege assets, mortal auxiliaries, and several Black Legion detachments remain within projected devastation zones. Spent tools." The words contained no anger, no contempt even, just classification. Morcath said nothing. Abaddon's gaze remained on the pylon fields. "Redirect surviving engines. Slave remaining control systems to your communion spine. Lock gravitational descent through Cadia's rotation and correct for shield interference. I want the impact across the pylon network. Warmaster, the phalanx fire has damaged stabilization. The fortress may break apart during descent. Then its corpse will fall in pieces. The Blackstone heart resists. Teach it obedience one last time." Morcath's breath came through the vox, distorted by distance and machinery. For a moment she was only human, Then the fortress harmonics swallowed that weakness. As you command. Orders spread from the vengeful spirit like poison in clear water. Across the crippled will of eternity, engines that should have slept in emergency stasis were forced awake. Dark Mechanicum priests screamed scrap code through ruptured Vox altars. Those who refused the impossible were fed to their own machines. Those who obeyed died more usefully, their augmetics burning out as they rerouted power through conduits never meant to endure such strain. Bound psychers in the surviving choir spines ignited one by one, their souls becoming brief candles in the fortress's failing nervous system. Slave crews were driven into collapsing maintenance shafts with lash and blade, turning manual wheels the size of hab blocks, pulling chains that cut through their hands, shoving control rods into place while radiation stripped the skin from their faces. Morkath sat at the heart of it. Her body was no longer entirely visible beneath the cables. Blackstone needles pierced her spine, throat, skull, and heart. Brass clamps held her upright on a command throne grown partly from alien architecture and partly from human cruelty. Her eyes had gone black with communion. When she spoke, the fortress spoke with her. When she bled, the control systems accepted the offering. When she screamed, the engines answered. The will of eternity turned. Not like a ship, like a moon deciding to fall. Imperial augurs noticed within moments. Below, Cadia's command structure received the impossible data in fragments. Orbital monitors shrieked warnings. Skitarii noospheric relays spat Binharic terror. Cadian Auspex stations tried to calculate the trajectory and produced results their operators rejected, then rechecked, then understood. The Blackstone fortress was no longer maintaining bombardment posture. It was no longer withdrawing. It was descending. In a command vault beneath Casa Kraf, officers argued for seconds they did not have. Impact projection. Impossible. Recalculate. Recalculated. Emperor preserve us. No time. Send it to all commands. The warning moved through Cadia's bleeding networks. Vox towers carried it until they were jammed. Runners carried it where Vox failed. Light codes flashed across bastion faces. Artillery command nodes received it and continued firing because there was nothing else to do. Evacuation routes shifted priority. Transports were ordered to launch now, not when loaded, not when cleared, not when the wounded were counted. Now, men who had believed they were fighting an invasion began to understand that the enemy no longer cared about the ground beneath their boots. Abaddon had changed the victory condition. Cadia's defenders had been fighting to hold walls, preserve command, protect pylons, and bleed the invader. Abaddon had chosen planetary murder. On the surface, some looked up. Through smoke, ash, fire, and the bruised light of the eye, the will of eternity began to eclipse the sky. Its broken body crossed the heavens in slow, terrible descent, vast beyond comprehension, Blackstone flanks burning where atmosphere clawed at its wounds. Debris fell ahead of it as meteors. Sections of corrupted superstructure tore free and became flaming mountains. The fortress's shadow passed over trenches, casas, plague fields, siege lines, evacuation columns, and the dead of both empires. On the vengeful spirit, Abaddon watched without triumph. Triumph would come later, perhaps, or perhaps not. The long war had never required joy. The broken Blackstone fortress fell toward Cadia, and beneath it the pylons waited like the teeth of a lock about to be smashed from the door. The will of eternity struck Cadia like judgment without mercy. For one impossible instant, the broken Blackstone fortress seemed to hang above the world, vast enough to eclipse nations, its angular wounds burning as atmosphere clawed fire from its flanks. Then gravity claimed the corpse of the ancient weapon, and the sky came down. Impact did not sound like thunder. Thunder belonged to storms and artillery, to mortal things with beginnings and endings. This was deeper. It was the voice of a planet being struck in the bones. The collision drove through atmosphere, shield layers, Cloud banks, ash storms, falling debris, and the last screaming shells of anti-orbital batteries that fired until the fortress blotted out their targets. When the Blackstone mass met Cadia's surface, the world convulsed. Continents shuddered. The first shockwave crossed the impact zone faster than prayers could be spoken. Mountains broke open like rotten teeth. Fortress lines vanished under walls of dust and pulverized stone. Entire armored regiments disappeared into the ground as tectonic seams split beneath them, swallowing tanks, artillery trains, fuel convoys, and columns of men who had been marching toward the next defensive line. Cazas that had stood through centuries of siege folded inward, their outer walls cracking, their inner bastions collapsing, their command towers dropping through their own foundations into black, screaming depths. The ground rose and fell in waves, not metaphor, not the imagined motion of frightened men. Cadia's crust buckled, roads split and stood upright. Hab blocks tore free from their foundations and slid into chasms glowing with fire from ruptured reactors. Shield generators overloaded in chains, their domes flaring white and then vanishing as the world beneath them shifted out of alignment. Artillery catacombs became tombs when ceilings came down and ammunition stores cooked off in buried suns. Oceans of dust rolled outward, ash dark and thick with powdered ferrocrete, soil, bone, and the ground remains of armies. The pylons began to fail. Abaddon watched it all from orbit with terrible stillness. The Strategium of the Vengeful Spirit was alive with alarms, tactical returns, impact models, casualty blooms, gravitational distortion, and screaming Vox traffic. Officers moved with hard efficiency around him. Serfs bled from the eyes as overloaded data streams cooked the implants in their skulls. Machine spirits growled through damaged auger chains. The hololithic projection of Cadia fractured and reformed again and again, unable to reconcile the violence unfolding below. Abaddon did not celebrate. A lesser warlord would have howled. A cornete beast would have praised the blood. A word-bearer would have called it revelation. A Night Lord would have savoured the terror. An Emperor's children degenerate would have sought sensation in the scale of it. Abaddon observed. Tectonic failure across the primary impact theatre. Pylon harmonics destabilizing. Orbital debris spreading through low anchor routes. Evacuation vectors narrowing. Void shield remnants collapsing. Warp pressure expanding along the dead zones where Blackstone coherence failed. Imperial fleet elements attempting desperate extraction under fire. Surface resistance continuing despite planetary failure. Still continuing. His eyes narrowed at that. Below, Cadia died badly, but not quietly. In ash-dark streets, where the sky had become a falling ceiling of fire, Cadian regiments still formed firing lines. Men stood ankle-deep in dust and blood, laser guns raised, faces hidden behind cracked rebreathers and grime. Some had no officers left. Some had no vox. Some had no idea whether the next order had come from command or from a dead man's handset, still transmitting through static. They fired anyway. A company held the mouth of a transit tunnel, while civilians, wounded, data clerks, tech adepts, and broken soldiers limped toward evacuation platforms beyond. The Cadians knelt in two ranks, front line firing, rear line reloading, just as they had been drilled before they were old enough to understand why. A chaos spawn came through the dust on too many limbs, dragging entrails from a dozen bodies caught in its spines. The first volley staggered it, the second blinded it, the third killed it close enough that its fall crushed 3 men beneath its twitching bulk. The line closed around the gap and kept firing. In another sector, an officer ordered an evacuation he would not join. His command bunker had cracked down the center, one wall open to a street full of screaming wind and falling ash. He stood at a Vox unit with blood running from his ears, calmly assigning shuttle priority to the wounded, the command archives, surviving artillery officers, and regimental colors. when a junior lieutenant told him there was room on the last carrier if they left immediately, the officer looked at the hololithic casualty board, then at the firing ports where his men were dying to keep the route open. "Transmit until the line fails," he said. The lieutenant saluted and stayed. Neither reached the carrier. Across the dying world, soldiers dragged wounded comrades through streets that no longer led anywhere. They hauled men with missing legs over broken rails. They carried blinded Vox operators by the straps of their packs. They tore dog tags from the dead only when time allowed, and when time did not allow, they spoke the names aloud once and left them to the ash. Transports lifted from landing fields that were already splitting apart, engines screaming under overload, hulls packed beyond safety with bodies pressed so tightly that the dead could not fall. Abaddon watched evacuation vectors move through the hololith. He marked them. He ordered fire where useful. He ignored them where fire would be wasteful. His purpose had never been mere slaughter, though slaughter followed him as shadow follows flame. The pylons mattered. The gate mattered. Cadia's name mattered. The survival of scattered regiments did not outweigh the death of the lock. Yet survival was not nothing. That irritated him. Reports came in fragments. Creed remained active. Kell remained with him. Cadian command had not dissolved. It had been reduced, severed, shattered, and buried, but it had not dissolved. The hololith found Creed in a broken command theatre beneath collapsing rockcrete, then lost him in static, then found him again through secondary Vox triangulation. The Lord Castellan's orders moved through the dying network with the hard rhythm of a man forcing a corpse to stand. Here was no longer commanding victory. Abaddon knew that. Creed knew it as well. The Cadian was buying escape now, buying memory, buying continuation. Kell stood with him in every broken feed where the banner could still be seen. The color was torn, scorched, and filmed in dust, but it rose above men who had no business still being alive. Kell refused retreat, with the absolute simplicity of a blade refusing to bend. Around Creed and Kell, the mortal heart of Cadia beat its last, not as hope, but refusal, not salvation, denial. They would deny Abaddon perfect extinction, deny him a silent grave world, deny him the clean erasure of the name. For that, he almost hated them more than the pylons. The impossible alliance was breaking apart under evacuation pressure. Greyfax's authority, sharp and absolute in any lesser crisis, became one weapon among too many. Her suspicion did not vanish. It turned inward, outward, everywhere at once. She distrusted the Xenos. She distrusted the machine priest's rites. She distrusted the saint's miracle. She distrusted the survivors themselves, any of whom might carry corruption from the world's last hours. Yet command reality forced her hand. She could not halt evacuation to preserve doctrinal purity. Authority had to bend before necessity, and the bend cost her more than fear would have. Celestine moved among the dying, dimmed by the failing pylon fields and the ash of catastrophe. Her radiance flickered in the dust storm, still enough to make men rise, still enough to turn despair into one final act of obedience. But even she could not stand everywhere. For every soldier she lifted, 1,000 died beyond her reach. She abandoned the dead not from cruelty, but because miracles too could be outnumbered. Kaul withdrew through fire and collapse, surrounded by Skitarii remnants and machine ghosts. Servo limbs dragged Blackstone data, damaged instruments, fractured readings, and whatever scraps of impossible knowledge he could salvage from the ruin. His arrogance had gambled with Cadia's ancient mechanism, and now the mechanism was breaking beneath a falling fortress. He abandoned certainty. There would be no clean proof, no complete right, no ordered conclusion, only fragments carried into a future that would bleed for them. Trazyn moved like a thief through apocalypse. Even in the end, the aliens sought preservation. Warriors vanished into green light. Relics disappeared from collapsing vaults. Men who might have become exhibits were taken, and others were left because even an immortal collector could not steal a whole dying world. For once, the scale of destruction exceeded curation. He abandoned pride in select places, though not enough to make him noble. Nothing about him was noble. He chose what history would remember by what he could save, steal, or seal away. Abaddon despised them all, but he understood the shape of what they did. On the surface, his own armies died in numbers that would have broken a sane commander's soul. Cult hosts were swallowed by fissures while still chanting. Mutant hordes ran in circles beneath ash storms, abandoned by their gods and commanders alike, until firestorms erased them. Traitor guardsmen clawed at evacuation craft, whose pilots had no orders to land for them. Corrupted armor crews tried to retreat through streets that no longer existed, and were buried beneath falling hab towers. Demon engines thrashed as the weakening and shattering pylon harmonics tore at their bound entities from one direction, while the rising warp storm pulled from another. Some exploded, some collapsed as empty iron shells, some turned on nearby allies in blind agony. Warbands too slow to withdraw transmitted demands, pleas, threats, and vows. Abaddon ignored most of them. One Iron Warriors commander requested extraction for siege engines, still operational in a collapsing artillery zone. "Denied," Abaddon said. A Black Legion captain reported 3 squads cut off near a pylon fault line, surrounded by Cadians and tectonic fire. "Complete your objective." "We have no path of withdrawal, Warmaster." "Then you have clarity." The channel ended in bolter fire and static. A cult prophet screamed over an open band that the faithful had been betrayed. Abaddon ordered the frequency muted. Spent ammunition was not mourned. Broken tools were not recovered. Dead servants did not require supply. His reasoning was monstrous because it was clean. That made it stronger than rage. He had sacrificed the will of eternity because Cadia's destruction was worth the fortress. He would sacrifice cult armies, demon packs, mortal auxiliaries, siege engines, and legionaries for the same purpose. The long war did not reward sentiment. It rewarded the commander who could look upon a priceless thing and spend it without trembling. The pylons died in sequence. Their harmonics, once strengthening, began to tear loose from one another. Abaddon watched the black marks on the hololith flare, distort, and rupture. Some pylons cracked from base to crown, releasing pulses that flattened nearby armies and turned demons into streaks of smoke. Others sank into widening fractures as the ground swallowed them. One field held longer than the rest, a stubborn node of reality denying the warp even as the planet died around it. Then, an aftershock from the impact zone passed through the crust and broke its foundation. The pylon tilted, split, and disappeared into dust. The Cadian gate failed. The warp did not rush in like water. It unfolded like a mouth. Around Cadia, real space thinned. The eye's pressure surged. Storm fronts of Empyrean force rolled outward, dragging debris, ships, screams, and souls into widening unreality. The dead world began to slip, not wholly, not cleanly, but enough. Continents cracked away into impossible light. Bastions drifted at wrong angles before vanishing behind curtains of warp fire. Vox signals became prayers, then screams, then voices speaking from centuries ago or centuries hence. Ships too low in orbit were caught in gravitational and immaterial shear, their hulls twisting as crews died in moments that lasted forever. Cadia was being dragged into the warp. Still, the evacuation continued. That was the insult. Valkyries rose from platforms splitting beneath them. Bulk landers overloaded with survivors punched through dust clouds and debris storms. Naval transports burned hard for orbit, while traitor fighters and demon craft tore at them. Some exploded with thousands aboard. Some vanished into warp flare. Some made it. Enough made it. The tally came late, uncertain, ugly. Fewer than 3 million Cadians escaped. Abaddon stared at the number when it appeared. Fewer than 3 million from a world built for war. from a people raised as a blade at the eye's throat, from fortress cities, regiments, casas, trenches, families, archives, banners, and gun lines. Fewer than 3 million was not survival in any merciful sense. It was a remnant, a shard, a breath stolen from a corpse. But it was not nothing. The name had escaped. Cadia cracked beneath the will of eternity's corpse. Its pylons died. Its gate broke. Its armies were slaughtered beyond mortal comprehension. Its casas collapsed. Its proud continents drowned in dust and fire and warp light. Abaddon had won the world. He had broken the lock. He had murdered the symbol the Imperium had trusted for 10,000 years. And still, somewhere in the fleeing void, Cadian soldiers lived. They carried their dead in memory, their colors in burned hands, their discipline in their bones. They would speak the name. They would teach it. They would make it a wound the Imperium could rally around, instead of a silence. Cadia was broken. The guard was not. Abaddon's gauntlet closed slowly over the edge of the hololithic table, metal screaming beneath the talon's grip. The world died below him, but the name refused to die with it. For a time after Cadia died, even the victors were silent. The void around the broken world had no right to quiet. Ships still burned, reactors still failed, atmosphere still vented from ruptured hulls in glittering plumes of ice and blood. Escape craft still clawed away from the planet's corpse, while traitor fighters hunted them through debris fields. Vox channels remained choked with prayers, curses, targeting cant, machine alarms, and the last screams of vessels caught too low in the planet's death drag. Yet beneath all of it, a silence spread. It passed through the bridge crews of the vengeful spirit. It settled over the gun decks, where slaves stood knee-deep in spent shell casings, too afraid to cheer. It moved through the Black Legion officers, gathered around their tactical shrines, through the warlords whose pride had survived 10,000 years of defeat and victory alike, through the demon engines that had not yet begun feeding on their own handlers. For one impossible moment, the armies of the Eye looked upon what had been done and found no words large enough to hold it. Cadia was gone, not conquered, not occupied, not humbled beneath a new banner. Gone. The world that had stood at the throat of the Eye for 10,000 years had cracked beneath the falling corpse of the will of eternity. Its casas had collapsed into dust and fire. Its continents had broken. Its pylons had failed. Its regiments had died in numbers too vast for any mortal tally to sanctify. The gate was broken, and the lock that had bitten into reality since ages forgotten had been smashed from the door. Abaddon stood alone before the hololith. No one had ordered the chamber cleared. No one needed to. Those permitted to remain understood the shape of distance required by survival. The warmaster's armor still bore the marks of Cadia's final defense. Celestine's wound had been sealed beneath blackened plates, but the repair was temporary, brutal, and ugly. The talon of Horus rested at his side, claws half open. Drachnian hung in its prison with a silence that was not sleep. The hololith tried to show Cadia and failed. Where a planet had been, the projection rendered fragments, storm fronts, gravity scars, debris halos, and regions where real space itself had become unreliable. At the center of it all, the remains of the pylon network flared and died in broken pulses. Each pulse fought the warp for a heartbeat. Each pulse lost. Then reality tore open. It did not happen as a single wound. It happened everywhere at once, and nowhere cleanly. The death of Cadia and the destruction of its pylons sent a convulsion through the skin of the galaxy. The eye of terror swelled as if some vast pressure had at last found a seam. Warp storms that had raged for ages surged outward, joining, splitting, devouring stable routes, swallowing signals, and vomiting madness into the void between stars. The Cadian gate collapsed, not like a fortress wall, but like a law being repealed. Across the strategic projection, systems began to fail, not merely in the military sense. They disappeared from reliable knowledge. Astropathic relays went dark. Some did not go silent. They screamed. Choirs died mid-message, their last transmissions arriving as fragments of high Gothic prayer, battlefield reports, nursery rhymes, and voices speaking from the mouths of the dead. Navigational routes became nightmares. Warp passages that had been charted for millennia twisted into predatory mazes. Fleets translated into storms and emerged centuries wrong, or not at all. Stars flickered behind red-black curtains of unreality. Sectors on one side of the growing wound lost the light of terror's astronomicon, and where that light failed, fear found oxygen. The cicatrix maledictum was being born. The name came later from Imperial mouths that needed labels to make terror administratively survivable. Abaddon saw it before it had a name, a wound across the heavens, a galactic cut, the eye's breath spilling into the Imperium's lungs. Reports arrived in waves, Bellis Corona aflame, its shipyards battered, its orbital defenses savaged, its naval command struggling to hold formation as warp tides broke across the system like living storms. Agrippina besieged, forged shrines burning under demon engine assault, warpsmiths gnawing at its industrial arteries, Skitari cohorts dying in disciplined ranks around manufactorum gates, surviving Cadian forces redeploying under emergency command, their numbers pitiful beside what had been lost, yet enough to irritate the tally of extinction. Imperial fleets scattered, some running blind, some fighting without orders, some firing upon ghosts, some vanishing inside translation errors no navigator would ever explain. Zaraphiston spoke from behind him, his voice roughened by the pressure of too many futures tearing open at once. The wound widens, Warmaster. The storms answer. The Imperium is divided. Its light fails in the darkward regions. Worlds cry out and hear only themselves. Good, Abaddon said. The word contained no joy. On the hololith, chaos victory unfolded with the purity of a disease. Demons poured into the gaps left by the failing pylon fields and immediately fell upon anything with a soul. They did not distinguish between Imperial and traitor unless bound by stronger wills than their own. Cultists who had survived Cadia's death raised their hands to welcome angels of the dark gods and were torn apart by the things they praised. A plague host began devouring allied mortal auxiliaries before its lord reasserted control. A demon engine split open and birthed a swarm of wet, winged things that stripped the flesh from its own attendants. Warbands in the lower fleet turned on one another over salvage rights, captives, relic fragments, and insult. The gods laughed, and their laughter was hunger-given weather. Plague fleets pushed into undefended lanes, their hulls leaking contagion into void stations whose shields had failed during the storm surge. Cult worlds erupted in open revolt, not with order, but with ecstatic collapse. Governors were dragged from palaces and crowned with their own entrails. Administratum towers burned. Astropathic choirs were sacrificed by the populations they had once served. Penal moons opened their vaults. Mutant underclasses rose from sump, mine, and manufactorum. In some places, the Black Legion's victory became a banner. In others, it became only an excuse for madness. Abaddon watched the disorder and knew it for what it was. Not an ending, raw material. A Black Legion captain made the mistake of thinking otherwise. His name was Vorlath, and he had commanded well in the Void War. He had sacrificed ships without hesitation, burned Imperial escorts from their stations, and earned the right to stand closer to the Warmaster than most. That right killed him. Cadia is dead, Vorlath said, voice thick with reverence. The gate has fallen. The long war is won in all but the final march. Abaddon turned. The chamber felt the movement like a pressure change. Vorlath realized his error before the Talon reached him. That was something. Not enough, but something. The claws closed around his breastplate and drove inward. Terminator armor screamed as the Talon crushed through black ceramite, gold trim, fused ribs, and both hearts. Vorlath tried to speak, but blood filled his mouth and spilled down his chin in a dark sheet. Abaddon lifted him from the deck, held him there for all to see, and spoke quietly enough that every warrior strained to hear. One. Vorlath's boots kicked once. Abaddon tore him open with a twist of the talon and let the body fall in 2 heavy pieces. The war is not won, he said. Cadia's fall is not the end of the long war. No one moved. No one breathed loudly. It is the opening of the throat. The corpse steamed on the deck. Servitors approached to remove it, then halted when Abaddon's gaze passed near them. They waited, trembling in their chains, until he looked away. The warmaster returned to the hololith. There were irritations in victory, meaningful ones. Creed's defiance survived. Whether the man lived, died, vanished, or became another Imperial myth did not matter as much as Abaddon wished it did. His refusal had been witnessed. The Cadians who escaped carried it with them. Fewer than 3 million remnants, but remnants could become doctrine. Doctrine could become recruitment. Recruitment could become armies. The Imperium fed on martyrdom with the appetite of a corpse worm. Cadia's death would wound it, yes, but wounds could harden into scars, and scars could be worshipped. Cawl had escaped with knowledge. That was worse than relics. Relics could be broken. Knowledge bred. The Archmagos had touched the pylon mystery, tasted its mechanisms, stolen fragments of understanding from the edge of apocalypse. He would carry them into the Imperium's future like infection in a sealed vial. Trazyn remained unpunished. The Xenos had interfered, stolen, preserved, and vanished. Abaddon did not mistake the aliens' withdrawal for defeat. It was evasion dressed as dignity, and it would have consequences another day. Celestine endured. Symbols rarely had the courtesy to die when struck. They returned because belief called them, because the Imperium needed them, because mankind would rather resurrect its lies than face the dark unaided. The Cadian survivors carried the wound forward. That denial should have soured victory. Instead, it sharpened him. Perfect victory was a narcotic. It made lesser conquerors fat in the soul. Abaddon had no need of perfection. He had broken the gate. He had sacrificed a Blackstone fortress without hesitation. He had murdered a world that had stood against the eye for 10,000 years. He had cut the galaxy open and forced the Imperium into an age it had spent all its dying strength trying to postpone. He did not need every enemy dead. He needed the next breach, the next burning system, the next Imperial truth turned into ash, the next sanctuary revealed as a tomb, the next shrine world drowned beneath plague, the next chapter fortress starved in the dark, the next fleet lost in a warp route that no longer led home. The Imperium would not fall because one planet died, no matter how sacred its guns or stubborn its suns. It would fall by accumulated ruin, by severed roots, by extinguished hope, by the slow understanding that Cadia had been the door, and the door was gone. Around him, the commanders of the Black Legion lowered their heads, not in worship. Abaddon had no patience for that when directed at him, and less when directed at gods. They lowered their heads because they understood the lesson carved into Vorlath's corpse. Victory was not permission to rest. It was an order to advance. "Signal the fleet," Abaddon said. Siren, pale and blood-fingered, raised his head. All commands? All commands, warbands, plague fleets, siege hosts, raider claws, cult uprisings, demon-bound engines, every vessel still capable of murder. Cadia is ash. The gate is broken. The Imperium reels. We do not let it breathe. Zaraphiston smiled faintly, though blood ran from one nostril and down over his lips. The gods are laughing. Let them. And if they demand their share? Abaddon's eyes remained on the widening wound across the stars. They may take what falls behind us. The order went out. The vengeful spirit became the heart of a storm no longer contained by the eye. Across the fleet, engines ignited. Warships broke formation and reformed under new kill vectors. Plague hulks turned toward vulnerable systems. Murder-class cruisers hunted fleeing Imperial vessels. Black Legion capital ships gathered around the Warmaster's command signal. Demons pressed against wards, eager for the feast to come. Warbands received their targets and began arguing, boasting, threatening, swearing oaths they would break as soon as advantage required it. It did not matter. They were aimed. Behind them, Cadia's corpse burned and dissolved into unreality. Ahead, the galaxy opened in pain. Abaddon stood before the hololith, a figure of black iron and colder will, surrounded by the red light of dying systems. He had not become a beast drunk on victory. He had not become a prophet lost in revelation. He remained what he had always chosen to be: warmaster, executioner, heir to failure only because he had made failure into a weapon, the son of a dead rebellion who had learned not to repeat his father's mistakes without first understanding their cost. He looked upon the spreading cicatrix maledictum and saw not madness, but route lines, not apocalypse, but opportunity, not the end, but the first true movement of the endgame. Cadia fell, he said. The gate broke. Now let the galaxy learn what it means to breathe the air of the eye. No one answered. No answer was required. Abaddon turned from Cadia's corpse toward the wider Imperium, and across the stars, the great rift burned like a wound that would never close.